A silent guest, present, yet voiceless. What truth hides behind their silence? Welcome to Veil Files. I am your host, Thorn. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Your voices bring these mysteries alive. Let's begin. It was upon a dreary November evening, the fog hanging low over Baker Street like a heavy curtain, that the singular case of the visitor who never spoke a word began. I had been seated by the fire, perusing the day's medical journals, when our landlady announced a caller. The man who entered was of medium stature, his coat damp with mist, his hat pulled low so that the gaslight scarcely touched his features. Yet what struck me immediately was not his appearance, but his silence. He inclined his head respectfully, stepped forward, and placed upon the table a small, leather-bound portfolio. Without uttering a syllable, he opened it, revealing a single, folded sheet of paper. Holmes, who had been in his chair with the languor of one whose mind is yet occupied with unseen matters, straightened instantly. His keen grey eyes fixed upon the visitor with that hawk-like intensity I knew so well. "You choose your manner of communication with some deliberation, sir," said Holmes coolly. "Very well. Let us see what compels you to silence." The man gave a short bow and pushed the paper across the table. I leaned closer as Holmes unfolded it. Written in an elegant but hurried hand were the words, "She will vanish before dawn. If you value her life, act swiftly." There was no signature, no mark of address, merely those stark lines that seemed to throb with urgency. I confess, my medical instincts overpowered my reasoning for a moment. "Good heavens, Holmes," I exclaimed. "This is a matter of abduction, perhaps even murder." Holmes tapped the sheet thoughtfully with a long finger. "So it would appear, Watson. But consider, our friend here has not spoken a word since his arrival. Is this an inability or a choice? His silence is as great a clue as the words upon this page." At this, the visitor's lips tightened, though still he offered no explanation. His eyes shifted toward the clock upon the mantel, as though every minute were of consequence. Holmes regarded him with a mixture of fascination and suspicion, then rose abruptly. "You do not speak," said he, "but you carry volumes in what you withhold. No matter, we shall act. Watson, fetch your coat. If a life is indeed in peril before the dawn, we must move at once. Yet take note, the absence of a voice may prove the loudest declaration of all." With that, Holmes thrust the note into his pocket, seized his walking stick, and strode toward the door, the silent stranger close behind. I had little choice but to follow, my mind filled with foreboding and curiosity alike, for seldom had we been launched into a mystery on so strange and wordless a summons. We had scarce reached the pavement before the stranger, with a swift, persuasive motion of his hand, indicated the street, and then, drawing a small ivory tablet from his pocket, wrote upon it with a pencil the words, "A cab, Kensington." There was in the characters the same elegance and restraint as in the earlier note, yet the hand that formed them was not wholly the same, for the stroke here showed none of the hurry which had trembled through the warning upon our table. Holmes's whistle cut the fog, and a growler swung from the gloom as though it had been lying in wait for his summons. Our visitor sprang to the step, then paused, and with another written line, "Permit me to ride upon the box," was gone from the door, and had scrambled aloft beside the jarvey before we could protest. His desire for silence was, it seemed, to extend even to the tolerably private interior of a hansom. "Curious," Holmes murmured, as we settled ourselves within. He had the ominous paper in his hand again, its folds now teased apart as delicately as though they were petals of some rare bloom. He fears to be overheard by us, who are his allies. That argues either distrust, which is natural in a desperate man, or else a secrecy not his to dispense. Note the silk lining of his cuffs darned with a thread too fine for his class, and the polish upon his boots. He is a servant, but one who must pass in drawing-rooms without calling attention to his presence. "A valet, Watson." I craned to study the fellow through the little glass. He sat very straight, his figure trim as a switch, his gloved hands resting in that studied repose which is the habit of those who know they may be observed by the great. "If he be a valet, why this pantomime?" I asked. "Surely a whispered word in your ear would not betray him?" Holmes's lips quirked. "A whispered word might betray his voice. He fears recognition, not of face, which any porter may forget, but of tone, which a mistress will remember to her last hour. Our man attends a lady who cannot risk his seeking help. He ventures to us upon sufferance and upon condition of silence. It is an admirable plan. It places us in his debt while keeping us ignorant of names." He turned the paper to the light which filtered through the half-curtained window, and I saw his eyes narrow upon a faint, diagonal sheen in the surface. "And yet the names will yield themselves. The sheet is not ordinary foolscap. It is a note-leaf from a private drawer. Observe the watermark. Do not protest. I am not a magician. The angle of the fibres betrays it. English paper from Westbury and Sons, Kensington High Street. They supply certain houses in that district with a crested stationery. A lady with pretensions above her means, I suspect, for the stock is costly, but the ink is inferior and the steel pen has bitten." "The hand is a woman's?" I ventured. "Not necessarily. But the hand is accustomed to small social obligations, notes of invitation, apologies, that sort of thing. Yet here it shakes with haste. See the long final stroke of swiftly, where anxiety overran discipline. Whoever wrote it was frightened and urgent, but civilized in the bones. There is something else. Your nose first, Watson." If the fog leaves it any efficacy, I took the paper, and, though my senses have been proved tolerably serviceable in the sick-room, I could detect nothing beyond the stale odour of gum and dust. Holmes, with the faintest air of indulgence, leaned and touched the edge with his own nostrils. "Violet and vetiver, a fashionable scent this season, overlaid by the merest breath of carbolic. The lady is in a household recently visited by a surgeon, or a nervous mother whose governess keeps the nursery ruthlessly clean. Add to this a smudge here, which you took for dirt. No, do not rub it. It is the grey of pumice. Our man's right thumb bears the same paling upon the glove. He polishes silver as often as boots. Valet, certainly, and as violet scent rarely finds its way to the pantry, he attends closely upon a lady of the house. Now why before dawn? Because an elopement is planned, I said, warming to the race of conjecture. Or else a steamer leaves before daybreak, and the lady is to be conveyed aboard. Holmes's brows rose. Excellent. You see, when cajoled, you will run. Kensington opens upon half a dozen routes. Paddington for the west, Victoria for the coast, or the river, if one is particularly dramatic. But London offers a simpler contrivance than the sea, the workhouse, and the private asylum. A lady can be made to vanish more neatly into her own family's contrivances than upon any foreign mail. I confess I shivered. You believe she is to be confined? I believe nothing yet. The word is the writer's, not mine. But the fear is extreme, or we should have been given an address. Our valet serves two masters, the truth and his situation. He dares not bring us to his mistress's very door without a preliminary survey. He lodges us upon his box, as it were, until he sees whether our arrival would set the trap springing. The cab jolted onward, wheels crunching softly upon damp grit. At intervals the visitor leaned down to murmur through a cupped hand to the driver. I caught none of it, and suspected even the jarvey received more gesture than sound. Presently the pace slackened, and we were carried into that austere region where the fog seems to choose only the best houses to drape. A row of tall, stuccoed fronts presented themselves like pale, impassive masks. Our cab drew up not before a door, but at the mews which ran behind the crescent of dwellings. The valet descended, made a quiet sign for us to remain within, and disappeared through an arch where a single gas lamp made a pool upon the wet stones. Holmes, who had been in that cat-like stillness which is his herald of action, drew from his pocket lining the little magnifier with which he so often begins his miracles. He examined the interior of the paper's crease, the seam where the fold had strained. "There," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "A grain of something, white, crystalline." He touched the tip of his finger to his tongue. Salt, but not of the common sort, finer. Sea salt evaporated in pans, a kitchen that takes pride in its French, no, Norman methods. And here, there, upon the corner, a touch of soot, unlike the coal that coats our own chimneys. Coke soot. Their furnaces are modern, a household with money moving through it, Watson, but the hands that keep it are old. I shall have our address in a moment without the courtesy of any introduction. As if to disappoint him, the valet returned, a shadow resolved into a man by crossing the lamplight. He opened the cab's door before either of us could stir, and thrust toward Holmes the ivory tablet again. "The service door," he had written. "I can admit you without the butler's knowledge." "There is not an hour to lose." Below, in smaller characters, was added, almost apologetically, "Forgive, silence." I am not at liberty to speak. Holmes's hand closed lightly upon his sleeve. "You will not be at liberty long in any sense unless you place yourself frankly in our confidence. But I will not force you to disloyalty. Lead on. If we are to save the lady, we must see the stage upon which this little drama plays, and quickly." We passed beneath the arch and into the mews, where the odour of wet straw and horse sweat rose as warmly as in a stable yard on drill day. Our guide produced a key from his glove, another sign, Holmes's eyebrow observed, of an intimacy not granted to all, and turned it in a narrow door. In a moment we were within a corridor lit by a single lamp and lined with pegs from which aprons and coats hung in docile rows. The muffled thrum of a city came faintly, as if London itself had drawn its shawl tighter about its shoulders. "Kitchen," Holmes breathed, as much to establish the map of the place in my mind as to satisfy himself. "Scullery beyond, servants' staircase to the right. A large household, the smell of veal stock upon the air, and a hint of Madeira. They dine well. The valet, if valet he was, had taken to moving with that swift, soft-footed caution which I have seen in men who suspect a snare. He raised a hand now to enjoin us to silence, then pointed upward. We mounted the narrow stair. Upon the first landing he paused and pressed for our inspection the tablet once more. "Second floor, the blue room. She is guarded by Miss R... At midnight they will change her maid. Then—" The sentence broke off in a horizontal line, as if he could not bring himself to write the word. Holmes's hand, which had been resting upon the rail, tightened. "And this Miss R..." he murmured in my ear. "Is she the governess, the companion, or the jailer?" "Watch, Watson. A single pin will tell you we ascended to a broader passage where the carpet-swallowed sound portraits looked down upon us with the bland stare of generations who had never in their lives been required to come through the service stairs. The valet led us into a dim ante-room, and there, with a little gasp of resolution, stooped to write again. "If I bring you further, I am lost. I beg you examine the note." She wrote it. The mistress believes her asleep. Holmes took the tablet, weighed it for a half-second as though its very ounces might counsel him, and then slipped it into his own pocket with a nod that was oddly gentle. "You have done what you dared. Go, and do not betray yourself by any unusual punctuality or delay. We will make our own way from here." When we were alone, he beckoned me to a window which overlooked a narrow light-well, and there he drew out the warning once more. He held it to the pane until the faint light from the court penetrated the paper's body. "There," he said softly, pointing, "just beneath the upright of the D in dawn. Do you mark the faint impression?" She wrote this upon a desk where another sheet lay beneath. The ghost of the words above has bitten the fibres. Ah, that is the second line of the unseen letter. The hand that keeps her room is no mere companion. It signs, or rather initials, orders. That argues authority. Remember also the mixture of perfume and carbolic. They have been dosing her either to quiet her or to weaken her will. She fears to be moved while under the influence, which is why she says vanish before dawn rather than be taken. The assault is not upon her person, but upon her status. She will be declared unfit and whisked to a retreat of their choosing. Then this is wickedness within her own family, I whispered, and felt a surge of indignation. What do? We do nothing yet. We look. If we burst in like Lestrade with a warrant when we hold none, we give our enemies the cover of legality. Come. He had noticed that the blue room, to which our guide had so ominously referred, lay across the passage with a transom over its door. Holmes, who can move with the silence of a shadow when the occasion demands, slipped to it and raised himself upon the tips of his fingers. I saw his head turn slightly, a bird peering into a nest, and after a moment he lowered himself again, his face composed but his eyes bright, with that cold fire which in him is excitement. A lady sleeps or appears to sleep in a bed drawn a little too near the hearth, he said very low. There is a decanter upon the table and 2 glasses, one rinsed, one not, and upon the chair, Watson, the chair, a shawl pricked with pins, as though a woman sat and mended while she watched. Miss R dash 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 You shall verify it for me by the simplest of expedients, and look, a very ridiculous fellow in the process. Walk with as much clumsiness as Providence gave you to the far end of the corridor and cough, then come back as if you had lost your way to the water closet. Do not look at the door opposite the blue room as you pass it. I did as he required. My cough, more theatrical than medical, echoed faintly. As I returned, schooling my features to that mixture of apology and confusion which even the bravest man may feel in a strange house, the opposite door opened half an inch, no more. I would have missed it had I not been primed. A grey eye, rimmed with red from watching, looked out and withdrew like a snail at the touch of finger. I proceeded past, my heart thudding, and rejoined Holmes. "Excellent. he breathed. She watches while her victim sleeps, and she watches from concealment. Guilty vigilance wears that look. We have, then, a woman in authority, Miss R., who would substitute a maid at midnight, perhaps to accomplish something the present attendant will not. We have a house of money and modern convenience. We have a frightened writer with social graces and courage enough to defy her keepers, and we have a valet who, knowing the timbre of his own voice would hang him, has bound himself to silence. It is a puzzle set fairly before us, with but one piece yet lacking. "What piece?" I said. "The why, my dear fellow. The why is always the last thing we supply, but we shall not be kept in ignorance of the how. Before this night is much older, I shall know whether Our Lady sleeps by choice or by prescription. And if by prescription, whose hand writes it, he drew from his pocket, not the syringe which I feared, and which had begun to form in my mind with notions of dangerous experiments, but a little square of folded black silk. From it he produced the tiniest of mirrors, no larger than a coin, and a slip of steel bent cunningly upon itself like a spring. "Now," said Holmes, with that cool, almost playful tone which presages his boldest manoeuvres, "we shall borrow a whisper from the keyhole. You will stand so, shading me with your shadow, and in 2 minutes I shall have seen enough to decide our plan. Be very still, Watson, for before dawn a lady's fate may hang upon whether a floorboard creaks." Holmes slipped the thin mirror to the keyhole, and with the smallest twist of his wrist angled it to admit the faintest skein of lamplight from within. I could just discern the reflection, a pale ellipse framed by the ironwork, then the slow, precise movement of Holmes's thumb upon the spring of steel. His breath did not quicken. He might have been a watchmaker testing a cog. After a minute, though it stretched far longer in my imagination, he removed the mirror and spoke so low that even the carpet would have struggled to carry the sound. "She is not merely sleeping," he murmured. "There is the lassitude of the drugged in the slackness round the mouth. The decanter is not of spirits, but of a draught prepared in the kitchen. There are 2 glasses, and of the 2, the one with the milky crescent upon its inner face is the one she used. The other, rinsed hastily, bears the ghost of violet at its rim. Miss R. does not trust the maid to administer the draught alone." I felt a surge of indignation. "Good God, Holmes! If they are drugging her—" "We cannot storm the room on indignation, my dear fellow," he returned, with a hand that just touched my sleeve and steadied me. "We must be sure, and we must be adroit. Consider also the rope to the bell-pull, a neat contrivance, but in this instance a spiteful one. It has been looped back and tacked against the wall within easy reach of the watcher's chair. Should Our Lady stir or call, Miss R has but to place a finger, and the butler or footman will answer her summons, not the patient's. A fortress built of propriety is the strongest kind in London." He bent again with the little spring. There was a soft, insect-like click. "The latch," he breathed, "is of a pattern that yields to persuasion. But we shall not enter, not yet." He replaced the tool. "Before we place a finger upon a hinge, we shall know what authority is marshalled against us. Come." He drew me a few yards down the corridor to the stairhead, and then, with that feline poise which always astonishes me anew in a man of his angular frame, slipped into the shadow cast by a tall pier glass. From that vantage one could command both the door opposite the blue room and the junction where the corridor turned toward the family apartments. He stood there, eyes half-lidded, as if dozing on his feet, and in that posture listened. After a time, how long I will not swear, the whole house seemed to have slowed its pulse to match our waiting. We heard an almost imperceptible rustle and the faintest brush of skirt upon carpet. The opposite door opened by the width of a whisker. A figure looked out, a woman's face, sharp and pale, with the pinched, faintly bluish lips of habitual restraint. She wore no cap, her hair was drawn severely back from temples too prominent for beauty, and the iron grey of the locks was at odds with the dusky youthfulness of her eyebrows, a detail trivial enough until one considers artifice. She scanned the corridor, saw nothing to alarm her, and retreated again. The door closed as delicately as a finger placed upon a scale. Holmes's eye brightened. Miss R dash 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 Our sentinel. The bridge of the nose is reddened where spectacles would sit, yet she wears none at present. Vanity for the sick room, authority for the study. There is ink upon her forefinger, but not upon the others. She uses a fine pen. The skin at the mouth is dry, a woman who speaks little unless compelled. We have our house governess, companion, or, more likely, secretary, to the mistress, and one who finds a sour pleasure in administration. I should like to see her signature. Signature? You mean the unseen R you divined from the impression in the note? Precisely. If she keeps the house in hand, there will be a visitor's book, or at least a ledger for tradesmen, upon the hall table. A letter rack may serve as well. We will not walk through the principal floor like burglars. We shall pass as what we are, gentlemen accidentally astray. But first, the draught. He led me down again to the servants' landing and into the corridor where the kitchen's warmth breathed faintly. With 2 noiseless steps, he entered a narrow pantry that opened off the main passage. There, a marble-topped sideboard bore the spoils of recent dinner, a silver salver filmed with glass, a brace of cut-glass flasks, a muddler, and an apothecary's measuring glass that looked out of place to my eye among the culinary gear. Holmes took up the measure and held it to the light, then to his nose. Chloral hydrate, tinctured with orange, and the merest wash of laudanum, he said, almost clinically. A fashionable sedative made domestic by a cook who prides herself upon not terrifying the palate. They have been dosing Our Lady cautiously but consistently. Note the chalk upon the tray, powdered to cut the bitterness. And here, what have we? He indicated a folded square of stiff paper, stained in one corner, upon which a column of figures had been ruled in a tight, disciplined hand. Cheats ran the headings, and beneath them were ticks in pairs, marked at intervals I recognized with a little chill as those of midnight, 2 o'clock, 4. Beside the last pair, someone had written the word change. Holmes smiled without mirth. "Our midnight maid," he said. "They mean to alter the attendant and increase the dose, doubtless under cover of a physician's order that will be shown to any who question it." Before dawn, with the household yawning and the city at its most credulous, a carriage to a private house on the outskirts, or to a deucedly respectable home in St. John's Wood, where ladies with inconvenient opinions are soothed. We are just in time, Watson, but just in time will do. A step sounded at the far end of the passage, and we melted back into shadow as a scullery maid passed, her arms full of folded linen. She did not look up. Holmes waited until her tread diminished. Then, with an economy of movement I admire as much as any of his flourishes, lifted the measuring glass, tilted it, and let 2 drops fall upon his handkerchief. He returned the glass so exactly to its place that the ring left by evaporation upon the marble fitted it like a seal. "Evidence?" I whispered. "Assurance," he replied. "If at the pinch we must rouse the house and bring them to shame before their own servants, a whiff of this will do more than any rhetoric of mine. Come now, let us have the name we lack." We climbed once more, but instead of turning toward the blue room, Holmes led me along the corridor and through a discreet door into the back stair that served the principal hall. Voices came and went like draughts there, light and genteel, with the polite hum of a household whose members suppose themselves beyond drama. A clock chimed the quarter with a sound like silver tapped by a gloved finger. We descended 2 steps, and suddenly the space opened, a landing hung with etchings of Venetian scenes, a statue of Psyche bearing a lamp, and below, the glow of the hall where a pair of footmen conversed in undertones beside the umbrella stand. Holmes's hand on my arm pressed once, caution. Then he drew me, as if to view the prince, along the balustrade until we had the angle we required. Upon a polished table lay a sheaf of cards and a small ledger. The elder footman, who had the mien of a drill sergeant mellowed by service, turned to rebuke the younger for a crooked tie. In that moment, quicker than a conjurer's pass, Holmes descended 3 silent steps, reached and returned with a single envelope between finger and palm. We withdrew behind Psyche's lamp. He showed me the corner, Mrs. F. Vandeleur, 17 Cressida Crescent, Kensington. "The family?" he breathed. Vandeleur, not a title, but money, South African, if memory serves, brought home by a gentleman whose luck ran with diamonds until it ran out with a certain committee. A wife, Fanny, by the initial. Ambitious, we may suppose. The stationery would match. Let us see who calls upon them. He eased open the ledger with the same care he might give a lark fallen from the nest. The entries were in 2 hands, one bold, one fine. Among recent lines, one stood out for its neat parsimony. Dr. Abel Rivington by appointment, Mrs. V. A second, the same day, read, Miss R. Renton, private, no cards. Holmes's face scarcely altered, but I felt the thought ripple through him like current through wire. "Renton," he said softly, "our Miss R. reveals herself, and a physician, Rivington, who attends by appointment upon the mistress. The apparatus grows visible, Watson, a nervous complaint cultivated, a doctor to dignify it, and a secretary companion to tighten the screws. We will test the doctor's draft presently." "Renton," I repeated, tasting the name. "Do you know it?" "I know of a family of that name in Shropshire, clergymen and schoolmasters. If she is of them, she will bring rectitude as a cudgel. But let us not climb into conjecture when the stairs to fact stand ready. Back to our eyrie, and then a little experiment. We regained the upper landing without mishap. The blue room's transom showed the faintest smear of light against dark. The opposite door, where our watcher had revealed her chilly eye, remained shut. Holmes crouched, drew from his pocket a tiny, flat bottle no larger than his thumb, and moistened with its contents a corner of my handkerchief where the sedative had stained it. "Hold this beside the keyhole," he whispered. "No more than a second, and then withdraw it. I wish to see whether a draught is detectable from the hall? If so, the dose is active, and recent I did as directed. Even through the barrier I caught the faintest whisper of the sweet, sour fug that speaks of a narcotic disguised as a cordial. Holmes's nostrils flared and were still. "Recent," he said. "They top up as needed to maintain the pretense of natural sleep. That argues timidity as well as calculation. They will not risk a dose heroic enough to betray itself to the eye. Cowards often do harm by half measures. Now, one last look." He used the little mirror again. The shawl remains on the chair. A book lies face down upon it, Southey's Life of Cowper, marked with slips of paper. The vigilant find piety among poets when wickedness wearies them. A key upon a ribbon hangs from the watcher's knob within. He paused, then smiled. "And now the thing which pleases me." "The window?" "What of it?" "It has been opened within the last hour. The condensation has left its lens upon the pane, but one arc is wiped. A hand reached out to the night. Why? Not for air alone, to drop something. That light well beneath our window. There is a ledge 3 feet down. If a lady wished to send a message to a rescuer who might, by providence, stand in the mews below, she would not fling it to the cobbles. She would lay it where a cautious friend could retrieve it. We shall borrow the servant's broom and test my fancy. It seemed a madcap idea, yet with Holmes the line between audacity and certainty is a narrow one. He fetched in a moment from the back stair a broom with a handle of uncommonly smooth ash, then guided me to the window of the anteroom across from the blue chamber, the same that overlooked the light well. He lifted the sash with infinite patience so that it gave no cry, and extended the broom downward as a fisherman plays a line. At 2 feet he found the ledge. At 3 the broom head rasped softly. Then, with that delicacy of touch which makes him at once the best and the worst of violinists, he teased at something no eye could see. A rustle, not of paper, but of silk, and the broom's bristles came up bearing a fragment that clung like a burr. Holmes took it delicately between forefinger and thumb. It was a narrow ribbon, sky blue, with a single bead of glass fixed to it, and at the end a scrap torn from what might once have been the inner corner of a note, the paper's edge ragged and whitened by the tear. Upon it, in the same elegant, urgent hand we had seen before, were 2 words, incomplete: "Bad stairs." "Second stairs, maid stairs, or garden stairs. The latter, if the house leads upon gardens," Holmes said, eyes alight. "Our lady is not asleep at all times. She has made an attempt. The watcher caught her, I suspect, and tightened her net. But courage does not die in one who writes to strangers and risks her companion's wrath. The ribbon, sky blue, will be from a dress, the glass bead from a necklace or an ornament. She left a mark that her rescuer might recognize even in the dark." He turned the scrap so that the torn fibers caught the meagre light. "The grit upon it, do you feel it?" I rubbed it between finger and thumb. "Like sand?" I said. "Not sand, pumice." She has a nail buffer upon her dressing table, and her hands have the care of a lady who keeps herself in the eye of society. A woman of appearances, then, who is to be made, before dawn, to vanish from appearances. It is always thus. The theatre of London is crowded, Watson, but most dramas are played in rooms like these. We must write our entrance. What do you intend?" "To pay a call," he said lightly, "upon Dr. Abel Rivington by proxy. But first, a simpler ruse. You will remain in this anteroom. If Miss Renton emerges to relieve her watch, give me 3 taps on the doorframe and then cough. This time, use the throat Providence provided you. Meanwhile, I will make the acquaintance of the draft more intimately." He was gone before I could protest, moving with that swift security that comes from knowing every board, as one knows a chessboard after long study. I took my station. The house seemed to draw itself into listening. Far away, a carriage passed. The vibration found the banister and trembled along it like a plucked string. After some minutes, I cannot say how many, suspense has a way of stretching one's sense of time. The opposite door stirred again. The grey eye returned, colder than before, then vanished. My heart beat a tattoo, and I tapped as agreed, then loosed the cough. Holmes slid back beside me, eyes bright, cheeks faintly coloured with the pleasure of a movement nicely managed. In his hand he held a square of thin card, printed with a chemist's crest, and a neat label written in a firm professional script: chloral hydrate mixture, 1 teaspoon at night. A Rivington MD beneath, in smaller letters, for Mrs. F. Vandeleur. He slipped it into my hand as if it might burn him. "We have our proof and our pretext," he said. "The bottle from which the draught is poured bears this label under its lace of cut glass. Our doctor obliges the mistress with a soporific for the nerves, and the secretary obliges herself by doubling it when necessary. We will make use of Dr. Rivington's good name to pass the front, and of Miss Renton's conscience, if any shred remains, to prick her into error." I looked from the card to the closed door, behind which a life seemed to breathe in chains. "And the lady?" I asked. He folded the ribbon and the scrap of paper into his pocket-book with the tenderness of a man handling a clue that is also a plea. "She is brave," he said simply. "Brave people deserve allies more than pity. Keep watch, Watson. The hour of the maid's change is our hinge. At midnight we shall move." The clock in the hall struck the half-hour with that discreet silver note which seems designed less to tell time than to soothe it. Holmes, who could draw energy from suspense as other men draw it from wine, grew, if anything, the calmer as midnight approached. He had arranged his implements, a pair of thin gloves, the little mirror, the black silk, and that tiny bottle that held some harmless mixture of his own contrivance, in an order so exact that I, who know his habits, saw at once he intended to move in quick succession. Yet he did not stir until the house itself signalled that moment for which we waited. It began with the soft cough of a footman in the passage below, and the whisper of a door eased upon its latch. A woman's step, not the light run of a maid, but the steady, unhurried tread of one sure of her dominion, came along the carpet. Then lower, the fluttering lighter scurry of a younger girl striving, as such do, to make no sound at all, and thereby making some. The opposite door, where the watcher kept her post, opened by a hand's width. I saw, as before, the pale, controlled oval of Miss Renton's face. Her glance swept, found nothing, and widened the aperture enough to pass a word to her subordinate. The faintest murmur at the stroke. "Do not spill. The spoon is to be washed." The door closed. Holmes breathed, not a word, simply the act, as a swimmer does before plunging. He tapped my wrist, a signal we had long established, and slid away toward the service stair. I followed, keeping my bulk from the skirting with all the care I could. In the pantry he pointed to the marble slab where the apothecary's measure had stood. The glass remained, the chalk lay in a little envelope folded and clipped. A small brown bottle, such as any chemist employs, had been moved half an inch, an infinitesimal shift, but to Holmes the difference between an idea and a proof. "Rinsed and replaced within 10 minutes, he whispered, peering. "We cannot intercept the draught at the kitchen stage now without showing our hand." "Very well. We will intercept it at the bedside." "Give me that card." I produced the chemist's label which bore Dr. Rivington's name. Holmes considered it no more than an instant, then, to my astonishment, wrote in pencil upon its blank reverse, in a cramped imitation of a medical script: "If the patient remain restless, 1 teaspoon may be repeated after an hour, but not if pupils constrict. A.R." He breathed upon the card to dull the shine of fresh graphite, then slid it up his sleeve. "You will play messenger?" I murmured. He gave that little shrug of his which means, if fate is kind. If they will not speak to a stranger, they may read a card, and a house that lives by the written rule can be undone by a written exception. Come, we regained our station as the corridor above stirred again. Miss Renton emerged from her covert with a small key dangling from its ribbon upon her wrist. Behind her came the maid, a slight, sallow girl with anxious eyes, and a cap set too far forward from nervous hands. She carried a tray on which stood a glass and the cut-glass decanter whose contents were faintly opalescent, even in that cautious lamplight. Miss Renton's lips moved. Measure, wipe, observe. And the girl, with the air of one performing an algebra of which she has never been shown the proof, dipped, measured, added a little water, and wiped the rim with a corner of clean muslin as if she feared to smear the arithmetic of it. Miss Renton took the glass herself into the room and closed the door almost, but not entirely. The girl stood with head bowed as at a chapel door. Holmes's finger made a swift horizontal sign. It meant, "Stay." He moved, bent, and with a touch of the wire already set against the latch, created that infinitesimal give which to a safe pick, or my companion, is as legible as print. He did not open, he created merely the suggestion of a draught. In that breath of air the very slightest perfume came forth, the same faint sweetness we had detected, and with it the duller, bitter ghost beneath. We had barely regained our angle when the door widened by an inch. Miss Renton's head appeared again, the vigilant eye for an instant in profile. "The spoon," she murmured, and the maid, who had been clutching it as though it were a talisman, started and almost let it fall. She recovered, presented it, and in so doing glanced up fully at last. I saw in that timid face not malice but fear, fear so real that I felt an impulse, foolish and quixotic, to take the girl by the elbow and lead her out of the house into the clean night. Holmes did not traffic in impulses. He slid past me with the swiftness of a shadow, and in the little anteroom opposite the blue door he crossed to the window and raised it half an inch. From his pocket he produced the sky-blue ribbon and the glass bead we had recovered. He knotted the ribbon about the curtain cord where, if one lay in the bed and woke, a faint movement of air might stir it. A childish thing, one might say. Yet to the imprisoned a sign is sustenance. He returned, satisfied, and set himself so that he could regard the transom's dim glow. There were then several minutes in which nothing happened. Then something that to us, whose nerves were stretched upon the tightest rack, seemed a cannon shot, the clock in the hall striking the hour. The maid's shoulders stiffened. She knocked softly. The door opened. She slipped in. It closed. Holmes's palm, warm and dry, pressed my wrist once more. He did not look at me. His eyes were fixed upon the opposite door, the watcher's door. If Miss Renton meant to exploit the change of attendant for any darker purpose than a replenish of the draught, she would do it now, when the new girl, intent upon not failing, stood between obedience and compassion like a balance with too many weights. A minute passed, then another. At 3 minutes, the watcher's door opened again, wider this time. Miss Renton stepped into the corridor. She moved toward the staircase, not quickly, but with that assured, measured step I had noticed before, as though her own motion must convey propriety to the world. Holmes was gone from my side, as if the air had taken him. He reappeared at the angle of the stair 2 yards ahead of her, a folded card in his fingers, and the blandest, most respectful expression upon his face, an expression I have seen him wear in drawing-rooms, when he means to tread the very edge of impudence without placing a toe beyond it. "I beg your pardon," he said, low and deferential, lifting the card just so that the name at its base would catch the eye before any countenance did. "A message from Dr. Rivington for Mrs. Vandeleurs' use." He was detained and asked that this be placed directly in the hands of the lady in charge of the patient's regimen. Miss Renton stopped as a horse does to a firm hand. Her look fell, as Holmes had intended, to the card, then rose to his face, then dropped once more to the card, where the A.R., with that bare flourish of professional impatience, seemed to promise authority. She extended a hand without a word. Holmes did not surrender the card. He indicated, with a courteous tilt, that he would place it upon the small table at the stairhead. She allowed this small trespass as one grants a chair to a messenger who carries a tray, by sufferance, and with the belief that the permission implicated neither party. If repeated, she read aloud to herself, 1 teaspoon, pupils constrict. Her eyes narrowed by the fraction of a line. She glanced toward the corridor, and if I read that pale face rightly, experienced in that instant the faintest momentary comfort at being told that her own practices wore a doctor's sanction. If Holmes had struck her with arguments, she would have bristled into denial. By giving her the means to sin more securely, he loosed, for a moment, the tight rein she held upon herself. "You will leave this," she said. Her voice had the dryness of paper that has been folded too many times. "If Dr. Rivington calls, we shall inform Mrs. Vandeleur." Holmes bowed as if she had conferred a favour and stepped aside. She passed on. When her footfall was no longer upon the stair, he placed a finger against the card and, to my amazement, slid it 6 inches toward the edge of the table. It was a small movement with a large intention. Any servant running up might find it, read it, and so prepare in their minds a little legend by which Miss Renton's future requests would pass without question. Holmes's mischief, when he engages in it, is conducted with an economy bordering upon artistry. We returned to our station. Inside the blue room there was a faint clink of glass upon wood, and then the softest sigh, a sigh that struck me like a cry because it was so little. I felt Holmes shift again. "Now," he breathed, "we set our own pin. If she repeats, she must pour. And if she pours, I will know the measure she keeps for the second dose. Then, Watson, we choose between 3 roads, to wake the house and fight in the open, to steal the lady out by our servant's stair, or to spring a trap that brings the author of this plan to us." I am not yet resolved. Before I could answer, there came up from the mews the muffled turn of wheels and the creak of a carriage checked by steady hands. Holmes's head inclined, listening as a hound does when a distant rustle hints at game. He moved to the window and drew the blind a finger's breadth. In the narrow slice of night, I saw the lamps of a dark brougham, unmarked, with a driver who wore neither livery nor the ostentatious anonymity of a hired cabman. He sat well back in his seat, collar high, hat low, the universal costume of a man instructed to be seen as little as possible. The horses snorted, their breath smoked. The brougham did not come to the front. It waited in the shadow where one might load a trunk or a burden not meant for neighbours. Holmes closed the blind. "It is as we supposed. We have the means and we have the will. What we require is the confession of method that will satisfy even Lestrade at 9 in the morning, when this house will cry out that it has only followed the advice of a physician. For that we need ink. Come." He slipped to the little table in the ante-room, where a blotter and pen lay as if a lady had just drafted some trifling note. He moistened the pen, wrote 2 words upon a blank slip in a feminine hand, so swift and neat I should have thought it authentic had I not seen him form it. "Repeat dose." Then he went to the watcher's door and set the slip upon the skirting at a level where a vigilant eye might note it and bend to take it without stooping conspicuously. He tapped the wood so lightly that only a watcher would mark it, and stepped away into the shadow. We waited. The door opened a crack. A pale hand appeared, long and capable. It took the note. There was a pause, the kind of pause in which a mind, not sure of its own authority, seeks sanction outside itself. Then the door widened an inch more, and the same hand slid out the card with the penciled instruction upon it, as if to verify once again the message that had so conveniently arrived. I could almost see the working of Miss Renton's conscience, if the word may be used for so sterile a conflict. She looked left and right, and I saw, for the first time, more than ice in her face, a tremor at the mouth, a faint heat rise beneath the skin. She closed the door softly, and we heard the tiniest sound from within, the smooth slide of glass against glass. Holmes's hand was on the latch to the blue room in an instant. He turned it so deftly that it gave nothing away, and we were within and across the floor between 2 heartbeats. I had a glimpse of a figure upon the bed, a woman in her prime, I judged, though wan and too still, with hair loose upon the pillow, and that soft slackness at the lips which no honest sleep permits. The maid turned, startled, glass in hand, but Holmes's face, grave, authoritative, with that air of belonging which he can assume like a cloak, stilled her. He bent over the bed, took the patient's wrist, counted, touched a lid, and watched the pupil, then pointed with a surgeon's exactitude to the spoon. "Put it down," he said, low, but in a tone that no one in a sick room disobeys. Not another drop. The note is mistaken, as to the hour. If you wish the lady to breathe this night, you will give her air and nothing else. The girl set the spoon where he indicated and stepped back, as though a lightning flash had cloven the carpet. Holmes took the glass from her, his fingers never quite touching hers, and set it upon the table. From his pocket he drew that little bottle of his own, and with a movement so small I should not have seen it had I not watched for it, he traced the merest line upon the inside of the glass's rim. He leaned to the lady's face again, then nodded, less to himself, I think, than to the sleeping woman, as if to tell her in a language beneath words that an ally had come. We were out again, as noiseless as we had entered. Across the corridor, the watcher's door opened a hand's breadth. Miss Renton's eye searched, and did not understand what had shifted. She shut herself in. Holmes exhaled, and his features, which had been composed into that severe mask, softened into the alert good humour that follows a hair-breadth turn well taken. "She will not repeat," he said. "The girl is frightened into obedience, and Miss Renton is comforted into negligence. Now we must see who owns the brougham. If the mistress comes herself, she is our prime mover. If the butler comes, we have a household conspiracy. If Dr. Rivington steps through the service door, we have a man who sells his name as other men sell their honour. Take your choice, Watson. My money is upon the lady. And the patient?" I asked, unable to keep my eyes from the door, behind which the sky-blue ribbon moved almost imperceptibly, whether by a draught or a breath I could not say. "She will wake within the hour if we have guessed our chemistry correctly. When she does, the sight of that ribbon will counsel her to hold her tongue and her courage. It is often more useful, in a house such as this, to rouse a mind than to rouse a household." From below there came the muffled thud of a door eased against its jamb. Then voices, hushed but quick. A woman's tone, low, controlled, accustomed to being obeyed. A man's, respectful. A third, formal, with that indolent drawl I have heard in private physicians who spend too many afternoons in drawing-rooms. Holmes's mouth curved by a hair's breadth. "Our company assembles," he said. "Shall we make our bow?" "No, not yet. Let them declare themselves. A spider is never so eloquent as when it thinks it is." Alone he laid a hand upon my sleeve. "Do you recall at the outset I told you the absence of a voice might prove the loudest declaration of all? We are about, I think, to learn what silence has been saying." Holmes drew me back into the shadow of the anteroom, one finger raised for silence. The voices below came more distinctly now, though still muffled by the weight of carpets and the self-conscious hush of a household engaged in what it dares not name aloud. A woman's voice led, measured, deliberate, each syllable chosen as though it were coin given reluctantly. That, I felt sure, was Mrs. Vandeleur herself. A man answered her in the deferential tone of long service, the butler, no doubt, lending gravity by withholding all opinion. Then came the physician, doctor. Rivington, his tones languid but precise, the sort of professional ease that is meant to lull rather than to persuade. Their words did not carry to us in whole sentences, but we heard enough. Restless, insisted, must be removed, her safety as well as ours. Each phrase, torn by the muffling walls, carried the weight of conspiracy. Holmes inclined his head, listening with eyes half closed, and then, with a sudden sharpness, caught my sleeve. "Come, Watson." The stairhead. "If they mean to move her, it will be by the servants' way. We must see who commands." We slipped back to the landing, from which one could view both the Blue Room's corridor and the descent to the mews. From that vantage, shrouded by the tall pier glass, we became once more listeners. The steps mounted, the woman first, assured and unhurried, then the doctor, whose cane ticked against each riser, then the heavier tread of a man carrying some burden or instrument. Presently, Mrs. Vandeleur herself came into view. She was tall, her figure commanding though inclined to stoutness, her hair dressed elaborately for one who claimed to sit by an invalid. Jewels glinted even in the dim gaslight of the corridor. They struck me as almost garish at that hour. Her expression was not of grief or anxiety, but of firm, cold resolution, as if she had steeled herself to an unpleasant necessity. Behind her came Dr. Rivington, a thin, cadaverous man with an air of weariness about his features, and lastly, the butler, his arms laden with a folded shawl and a cloak. They halted before the Blue Room. The maid, still within, had evidently obeyed Holmes's injunction, for she now opened the door only part way, holding the spoon as though it burned her. Mrs. Vandeleur addressed her in that same deliberate cadence. "She sleeps?" "Good. You have done well. There must be no disturbance." The maid stammered something indistinct. Mrs. Vandeleur's reply cut like glass. "No excuses. Attend to Miss Renton's directions. The carriage waits." Dr. Rivington moved closer, producing from his pocket a small vial. "A final draught," he murmured. "The journey must not wake her." Holmes's eyes gleamed at me, and I felt his hand tense upon my sleeve. He waited until the vial was lifted toward the glass, then stepped forward with the noiseless confidence of a cat. He came upon them so suddenly that the butler started back a pace and the doctor nearly let the vial slip from his fingers. Mrs. Vandeleur turned, her face a mask of astonishment rapidly settling into anger. "Pray, madam," said Holmes in his most courteous tone, "do not trouble yourself. The lady within requires air, not chloroform. One draught more and you would have needed a coroner rather than a carriage." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Mrs. Vandeleur's eyes, cold and commanding, met his. She recovered quickly, schooling her features into disdain. "Who are you, sir, that you presume to instruct me in my own house?" "My name is Sherlock Holmes," he replied, with the quiet assurance of one who knows his name to be sufficient. "This is Dr. Watson. We come at the request of one who has observed your household's peculiar methods and feared that a lady's liberty and her life were in danger." Dr. Rivington drew himself up, affecting indignation, though his hand trembled slightly. "This is monstrous. I am the attending physician. I prescribe only what is necessary for the patient's nerves." Holmes's eyes pinned him. "Necessary?" "Chloral hydrate in double measure, laudanum tinctured into it, repeated at intervals sufficient to depress respiration. If that is necessity, sir, I should dread to see your indulgence. You supply the signature, I see. The neat prescription label upon the bottle bears your hand, but you do not pour the dose. That office is left to Miss Renton, is it not? Thus your conscience is shielded by a secretary's hand, while your name bears the weight. An admirable arrangement for all, save the victim." The doctor's mouth opened, but no words came. Mrs. Vandeleur interposed with icy calm. "You trespass, Mr. Holmes. I shall have you removed. My sister is unwell. We act only for her good." "Your sister?" I exclaimed, unable to restrain my astonishment. Holmes nodded slightly. "Indeed, Watson. The lady in the Blue Room is Miss Clara Vandeleur, the younger sister of our hostess. She has fortune of her own, a portion which, if I recall the terms, is to pass into trusteeship should she be declared unfit to manage her affairs. A convenient malady, madam, when a family's investments run thin." Her lips tightened, but she betrayed no surprise. "You speak as if you had knowledge of matters that do not concern you." "They concern the law," Holmes returned coldly. and they concern me when a frightened hand sends for aid in the only way it dares." "She wrote the note, madam, the one that reached Baker Street by the agency of your valet. She risked your displeasure because her very person was at stake. Do not mistake me. I will not leave this house without her assurance of freedom." The butler shifted uneasily, his eyes flicking, between his mistress and the detective. The maid, clutching the door, looked ready to weep. Only Miss Renton remained impassive, her gaze like a shuttered window. Mrs. Vandeleurs' voice hardened. "You overstep yourself. Dr. Rivington will testify to my sister's incapacity. You have no authority here." Holmes drew from his pocket the chemist's card with its penciled addition. He held it up. "Here is your authority, madam, the very snare you meant to use. This instruction, forged to justify a second dose, lies now in my hand. You were careless enough to trust that the written word, once seen, could never be gainsaid, but I have it. Scotland Yard will find it enlightening." Her composure wavered then, though only by the flicker of an eyelid. Rivington made as if to protest, but Holmes silenced him with a glance that cut sharper than speech. "Spare yourself, sir. Your reputation will hang by this thread. You may salvage a remnant of it by confessing now to undue persuasion. The alternative is a charge of conspiracy and attempted murder." At that word, "murder," the maid gave a gasp, and even the butler paled. Mrs. Vandeleur drew herself up to her full height. "You dare accuse me of such a crime?" "I do not accuse," said Holmes evenly. "I state the fact that one more draught administered as you intended would have stopped your sister's breath before the carriage reached the corner. You may call it necessity or treatment. I call it what it is. If you doubt me, summon any competent physician in London, my friend doctor. Watson here will testify as to the danger." All eyes turned to me, and I gave what confirmation I could in measured words. "The patient's pulse is already thready, her pupils contracted. Another spoonful might well have proved fatal. I cannot call it medicine. It is poison." A silence followed, taut and suffocating. At last Mrs. Vandeleur turned sharply to Rivington. "You assured me—" she began, then stopped, realizing too late that she had spoken against herself. Holmes's voice was iron. "That will suffice. You will not move your sister tonight, nor dose her again. Tomorrow, under proper medical supervision, she may choose for herself whether she remains in this house. Until then, I advise you to consider what account you will render of these events when they are laid before the authorities." Mrs. Vandeleur's mask cracked then. Anger, fear, and calculation warred across her features, but still she did not yield. "You cannot prove intent," she said coldly. "On the contrary," Holmes replied, and from his pocketbook produced the fragment of paper tied to the blue ribbon, the desperate message that had been dropped from the window. He held it before her. Here is her own appeal. It names the stairs by which she was to be removed. That, with the chemist's label and your doctor's complicity, will persuade any magistrate. The butler, visibly shaken, set down the cloak he carried. "I will have no part in this, madam," he said hoarsely. "I have served your family 30 years, but I will not be party to murder." The maid dropped her spoon and burst into sobs. Miss Renton alone stood rigid, her face like stone, yet even she looked to her mistress for instruction. For the first time Mrs. Vandeleur faltered. She pressed her lips together, drew herself with difficulty into composure, and said, "Very well. If you choose to make a spectacle, I cannot prevent it. But you will regret crossing me, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes inclined his head gravely. "That remains to be seen. For the present, Watson, let us see to the lady herself." We entered the blue room fully then. The woman upon the bed stirred faintly, her lashes fluttering. I felt her pulse, which beat weakly, but with a hint of revival. Holmes placed the ribbon gently upon her hand. Her fingers closed upon it with the instinct of one grasping at life itself. "Rest now," he said softly, though I knew she scarcely heard. "You are safe. When you wake, it will be to freedom. From the corridor, came the sound of retreating steps, Mrs. Vandeleur sweeping away, her household trailing in disarray. Holmes stood over the patient a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to me with that glint in his eye which always presaged further discovery. "Do not suppose, Watson, that the play is finished. We have checked their move, but we have not yet uncovered the full design. The silence of our valet friend, the urgency of the note, the carriage waiting in the shadows, these are threads yet to be drawn. The game is not ended. It has only begun." Holmes lingered by the bedside until the faint rise and fall of Clara Vandeleur's breathing had steadied to a rhythm less ominous. He placed 2 fingers gently at her wrist once more, then allowed the hand to rest upon the coverlet. His expression was one of stern calculation rather than comfort, yet I, who had long observed him, knew it meant he was satisfied she was safe for the moment. He beckoned me to follow him back into the corridor where the silence of retreating footsteps still echoed faintly down the stair. "They will not sleep," he whispered, "for defeat rankles more bitterly than fear. Watch them, Watson. A cornered opponent becomes ingenious. Mrs. Vandeleur has tasted check, but she will not concede the game until she must. And what we have witnessed tonight is but the visible part of a deeper pattern." I asked what he meant, but he only gestured toward the opposite door where Miss Renton had withdrawn. "The secretary remains, you see. She is the hinge on which the door swings. If she falters, the whole contrivance collapses. Observe her, and we may learn whether she is jailer or prisoner herself." We withdrew again into the ante-room, keeping the faint glow from the blue room's transom within view. For perhaps a quarter-hour we heard nothing save the occasional creak of boards and the restless stir of servants far below. Then at length the watcher's door opened. Miss Renton emerged, a shawl about her shoulders, and moved with silent tread toward the stair. She carried in her hand a sheaf of papers. Holmes, with a glance of warning to me, glided behind her as noiselessly as a shadow. I followed, heart thudding, until we gained a vantage above the great hall. There she descended to a smaller writing room which adjoined the library, its door half ajar. From the landing we could see her seated at a desk, the lamplight full upon her pale, pinched features. She spread the papers before her and dipped a pen with that careful, mechanical precision of one accustomed to ledgers. Holmes's hand on my arm restrained me from leaning further, but his eyes devoured every movement below. "She copies," he murmured. "See how she pauses, counts, then resumes." "These are figures, not letters. A ledger, Watson. Financial, not domestic." Mrs. Vandeleur's ventures have suffered, I think, and the sister's fortune is to be harnessed. Renton is no mere companion. She is the instrument by which the scheme is executed. The silence of the valet becomes clearer. He dared not betray her name aloud, for hers is the hand upon which the whole fraud is written. The pen scratched steadily, pausing only for her to consult a small, locked book she had produced from her pocket. At last, with a sigh, she blotted the last line and gathered the pages. She locked them again in the little volume and slipped it within her bodice. Rising, she extinguished the lamp and ascended swiftly. We shrank back into shadow. She passed us by without suspicion and returned to her post. Holmes's eyes shone. "We have the channel now, Watson. Through her hands the fortune flows. If we can but prove the figures, the whole edifice topples." "But how, Holmes?" I whispered. "We cannot snatch the book from her dress." He gave that slight smile which told me he had already considered 3 ways of doing so. "We need not. The copy she made remains. She blotted it too quickly. Tomorrow, when the lamp is relit, the impress will stand in the paper beneath. That paper lies now upon the desk. I shall retrieve it at the opportune moment." We returned once more to the blue room. The maid still hovered uncertainly, torn between obedience to her mistress and fear of the grim stranger who had seized command. Holmes spoke to her with quiet authority. You will remain until dawn. Give her nothing but water. If your mistress commands otherwise, you will say that doctor. Watson forbade it. His word carries weight. Do you understand? The girl nodded, wide-eyed. I gave her what reassurance I could. Then Holmes drew me aside. Now, Watson, we must address the visitor who brought us here. The valet has vanished since we entered the house. His silence is too consistent to be mere caution. I would know whether he fled in fear or whether he lurks still. Watching the board as we play upon it, we descended by the servants' stair and came again into the chill of the mews. The fog had thickened, wrapping the dark brougham in a deeper cloak of shadow, yet the horses were gone. Only the faint tracks of wheels upon the damp stones showed that the carriage had departed silently during the confrontation upstairs. Holmes knelt, examined the marks with his lantern concealed by his cloak, and rose with a satisfied air. Shod with new iron, narrow tread, a weight sufficient for 2 persons and baggage, it turned east toward the river. Our opponent abandons subtlety. If Mrs. Vandeleur cannot remove her sister tonight, she will remove her evidence instead. Rivington, perhaps, or the paper's Renton guards. In either case, Watson, the brougham is the artery of escape. We must be prepared to cut it when next it comes. We re-entered quietly. The servants below had evidently been dismissed to bed, though an unnatural hush still hung over the house, as though each feared to breathe lest they be summoned. In the pantry, Holmes paused to examine again the little envelope of chalk. With a deft movement, he pocketed a pinch. "A laboratory sample," he said briefly. "It will prove what I already know, that the draught was adulterated beyond all medical prudence." When we regained the landing, he moved with decision. "We will not linger longer tonight, Watson. The lady is safe for the hours to come, and I have gathered what evidence I need. To remain would be to risk discovery before the trap is laid. Tomorrow we will return with Lestrade, and with the impress of those figures upon Renton's blotting paper, the case will be beyond dispute. Come." We withdrew as silently as we had come, descending the service stair and out into the misty street. The air struck cold after the suffocating tension within. We walked swiftly until Baker Street received us once more. There Holmes flung himself into his chair, lit the fire anew, and spread before him the ribbon, the fragment of note, the chemist's card, and the pinch of chalk. He regarded them with the same intensity another man might give to crown jewels. "You see, Watson," he said at last, "how the pieces marshal themselves. A sister with fortune, a household with declining wealth, a secretary to arrange the figures, a physician to sign the poison, and a carriage to bear the victim to her living tomb. Our valet friend alone of them kept faith with honour, and even he dared not trust his voice. He fears discovery more than he fears failure. Tomorrow we shall learn why I asked if he meant to confront Mrs. Vandeleur at once. Confront? Number. We shall let her betray herself. Lestrade will want names and numbers. I shall give him both. Renton's figures, Rivington's prescriptions, and the testimony of a servant who saw more than she wished. By dawn, Clara Vandeleur will wake, and with her waking comes freedom. That is our surest ally. He leaned back then, his eyes closing, yet I knew his mind still raced along a dozen tracks. For myself, I could scarcely sleep when at last I sought my bed. The image of the pale woman upon the pillow haunted me, and the thought of the dark brougham waiting in the fog returned again and again. Somewhere in London, I felt, the wheels still turned, bearing away a secret that had not yet been told. When morning came, Holmes was already astir, his microscope upon the table. The chalk lay beneath its lens. He motioned me over with the briefest of greetings. "See here, Watson, the crystals of sodium carbonate. It was added to disguise the bitterness, but in quantity it betrays the hand of one careless or in haste. No physician would sanction such a mixture. It is the proof we required." At that moment there came a rap upon the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a card. Holmes glanced at it, and his brows rose. Our silent friend returns, he said. Mr. Edward Locke, valet to the Vandeleur. The very man was shown in, still silent, his face pale from want of sleep. He bowed, removed his gloves, and wrote swiftly upon his ivory tablet. They will act again today. Help her. Holmes regarded him keenly. You must speak, man, if you wish us to save her. The valet's lips trembled. At last, in a hoarse whisper, as if forcing words through years of restraint, he said, I dare not. They will know my voice. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. They may know it, Locke, but unless you use it now they will silence hers forever, and then what use will your silence be? The valet stared, torn between fear and duty. I saw his throat work as if speech were a wound he must reopen. At last he whispered, She wrote more than one note. I hid the others. They will search my room. You must come before they are found. Holmes's eyes kindled. At last, Watson, the key begins to turn. The silent visitor speaks, and with his words we may unlock the whole conspiracy. Quick, there is no time to lose. Locke's whisper was scarcely more than breath, yet it carried the urgency of a man who has worn fear as a garment too long. Holmes took up his hat at once, thrust a note into my hand to be dispatched to Lestrade by our trusty commissionaire, and, without further ceremony, signed to the valet. You shall walk between us, he said quietly. If courage flags, borrow mine. If caution fails, borrow Watson's. But above all, remember that silence has served your enemy. Lend me your voice for one morning, and I will return you your safety for many years. We found a cab and drove at a brisk pace through a London washed clean by a thin winter sun that had contrived to pierce the fog. Locke sat forward upon the edge of the seat, his gloved hands clenched, eyes fixed upon nothing. Once he stirred, as if to speak, and checked himself. Holmes regarded him sidewise with that rare gentleness which he sometimes accords to natures, strained past their habit. You said there were other notes, he observed. Where? In my room, sir, Locke forced out, each word like a nail drawn from hard wood. I feared they would search. I hid them where she believed I would never look. They will try this morning. Who they? He swallowed. Miss Renton? And perhaps Mr. Baines? Holmes's brows lifted. A new piece upon the board. The butler, sir? Locke whispered. He is loyal, always has been, but to the house, not to the right. He will obey her. Holmes nodded as if a trifling theorem had been proved. So much the better. A loyalty that runs to habit may be turned. A loyalty that runs to blood cannot. You have done well. We alighted at the Mews a few minutes later. The Vandeleur back gate wore its decorous coat of paint as innocently as if the night had never known a dark brougham and a sleeping prisoner. Locke led us along the narrow passage and up 2 flights to the servants' floor. His door stood ajar, not by accident. The latch had been lifted with a knife. Holmes's nostrils flared once. He put 2 fingers to the jamb where a smear of faint powder marked the paint. Talc, he murmured. A lady's glove searched here. Miss Renton does not dirty her fingers when a maid will do. Therefore this time she feared to trust a third party. He entered as one walks into a patient's sick room, eyes roving, feet silent. The bed had been turned back, the mattress prodded, the chest rifled. A shaving cup lay on its side. The mirror, cracked, reflected our faces in 2 uneasy halves. Locke went at once to the mantel, reached up as if to straighten the little picture that hung askew, and pressed the upper moulding. The frame slid, and behind it a shallow recess was revealed, a gap no wider than a hand. He drew forth a small packet wrapped in plain paper and bound with string. His breath caught as he saw the string uncut. They did not find it, he said, the words scarcely sounding like his own. Because they did not imagine that the humble should have ingenuity, Holmes returned dryly. He held out his hand. Locke yielded the packet. Within were 3 slips of the same private paper as the urgent warning we had first received, each written in that fine social hand that had trembled now and then under fear. Holmes read swiftly, his face immobile, while his eyes flashed like steel-catching light. He passed the first to me. "If anyone finds this, they make me write letters I do not understand, to men at the bank. Miss R. brings them, and if I refuse, she says I am ungrateful, and will be sent to rest where no one will trouble me. I do not sleep unless the glass is given me. The stairs by the garden are the only way that does not rouse the house. The second, he, Dr. R., said I must not be excited and that I cannot manage accounts, but I have always kept my own book. There is a blue ledger. She says it confuses me and hides it. I am not confused. She is the third, shortest, struck with the painful simplicity of a child's plea. Please bring a kind voice." Holmes's jaw tightened at that last line, but his tone when he spoke was only business. "The blue ledger, Watson. We shall have it before the clock strikes 11. He turned to Locke. "Your mistress?" "In her room. She breakfasts late. Dr. Rivington calls at 10, sir. There is to be—" His throat worked. "A paper from a magistrate. Miss Renton said so. The petition to place Miss Clara under restraint," Holmes finished softly. "So, our timing is perfect, our margin thin. Come." We moved quickly down to the domestic corridor. Holmes paused once more at the little writing room we had observed in the night. The door was locked now, but the wainscot beside it bore the faint polish of many hands, and the hinge betrayed the slightest slack. From the inner lining of his coat, Holmes drew a strip of blue-tempered steel, no wider than a lace, and slid it along the edge with a motion so light that the catch yielded as if from courtesy. He closed the door behind us and went straight to the desk. "The blotter first," he said. He lifted the pad, turned the top sheet to the light, and smiled that rare, thin smile which has warmed me on many a cold trail. "She hurried last night. The figures have bitten beautifully." He dusted the sheet with the ash of a cigarette, breathed upon it once, and the ghost of numbers rose upon the paper as if conjured by a medium's hand. Columns, dates, sums, checks. A name emerged more than once. Class. Vandeleur Tre. Beside it, a second hand, Renton's, precise and parsimonious, had written against each sum the legend by instruction of Mrs. F. Vandeleur, and twice the chilling doctor present. Holmes noted rapidly, his eye flicking from line to line with the appetite of a falcon stooping to prey. Banker's stamp, Harbury and Knight pall-mall. Check numbers in sequence, 47, 48, 53. She skipped 2, perhaps protested. There is our corroboration when Lestrade arrives. Now, the ledger. Drawers followed. The top yielded only stationery, the second keys. The third refused until Holmes coaxed it with the same blue steel. Within lay a squat book, bound in sober calf, its edges worn by frequent handling. He opened it, and we stood abreast, reading. If the blotter gave us shadow, here was substance. Transfers from Miss Clara's account to a household reserve, then onward to investments named obliquely, Colonial Venture, Argentina Line, Concessions, Private. In the margin, neat as a prayer book, R.R., Renton's initials, and, twice, a compact note, Riv, present. Holmes shut the book gently as one might close the eyes of a victim. "The whole mechanism," he said. "It would convince the shortest-winded magistrate. Replace the desk as we found it. We shall not be accused of theft when we have no need to steal." We withdrew as quietly as we had come. On the stair we met Baines, the butler, his face composed, his eye troubled. His glance slid past us as if he saw only air. Yet when we had passed, he turned and spoke low. "Mr. Holmes," he said, so soft I almost doubted I had heard him. "If there is wrong, I would not be blind." Holmes stopped and looked full at the man. "You have served a house," he said. "Serve now what makes a house worth serving. Keep the front door closed to every carriage until noon. Admit no physician unless accompanied by a constable. That is all. Baines's throat moved. He inclined his head very slightly and went on. Locke exhaled as if a band had eased from his chest. "Now, Miss Renton," Holmes murmured. "The hinge, as I told you. She will make one fatal choice before the hour is out, the choice between the paper and her conscience. We shall be at hand to witness which." We returned to the upper floor where the blue room lay. The maid, poor child, had been relieved by another. The first, it seemed, had collapsed into hysterics once the night's tension had loosed. The new girl was stouter, with the dogged, bovine patience that sometimes passes for strength. Clara Vandeleur slept more naturally. A touch of colour had returned to her cheek. Holmes, without entering, stood and listened. "No draught," he said. "Good. Now we shall wake a mind." He stepped to the watcher's door and rapped, not loudly, but with the exact rhythm a servant uses when duty bids and fear restrains. The door opened upon Miss Renton. In daylight her severity showed lines fatigue had not troubled to hide. The iron-grey hair, the unbeautiful mouth, the eyes reddened by late vigil. Hers was the face of a woman who has long mistaken control for care. "Miss Renton," said Holmes pleasantly, "your mistress will shortly receive a caller. Two, in fact. One is Dr. Rivington, the other Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. You may wish to have your figures in order." Her lips thinned. "I do not understand you." "You understand me perfectly," Holmes returned, still amiable. "You keep the accounts. You have kept them too well. They say much and nothing, which is the peril of neatness in the service of a lie. When the inspector asks for the blue ledger, you will be tempted to deny it exists." He leaned a fraction closer, and his voice softened. "Do not. You have been used, Miss Renton. Used by a mistress whose pride needed your orderliness, as a drunkard needs a glass. Do not let her name take you down with it. Bring the book, and your conscience may yet find a shore." A spark of anger lit her dull eye. "You talk of conscience to me, who has kept a household together, while my employer's sister has run it to tatters with her whims. You talk of being used. You do not know the years, sir, the petty economies, the constant watchfulness. If we had not acted, there would be nothing left for the servants, the tradesmen." "The servants will be paid," Holmes said curtly, "by the very money you diverted from the rightful purse. As for whims, Miss Renton, I do not rank among them a woman's desire to sign what she understands and to sleep without fear. Choose quickly. The bell you refuse to hear is already ringing." She drew herself up, dignity stiffening her as starch stiffens linen. "You are insolent. I take orders from one person in this house. You are not she." And with that she closed the door. Holmes's expression did not change. "So much for conscience," he said. "We shall try prudence." He beckoned to Locke. "This is the moment you feared. It is also the only one that will serve. You must speak to her." The valet recoiled a pace. The colour left his face completely. She knows." "She knows the sound of guilt better than the sound of your voice," Holmes interrupted, very quiet. "Say only this through the door, and no more. The blotter has told the tale. Then stand where I place you." Locke looked as a man looks upon a gallows he must mount. He wetted his lips, moved to the panel, and, with a courage that in another sphere might have won him a medal, he spoke. "The blotter has told the tale," he said, in a low, steady tone I scarcely recognized as his. There was a stillness as of a string drawn to breaking. Then within, a quick, incongruous sound, the scrape of a chair thrust back, the rustle of paper hurriedly gathered. The latch clicked, the door opened, a hand's breadth. Miss Renton's hand appeared, empty, then withdrew. The hand returned with the little locked book I had seen her consult in the night. She had meant to secure it elsewhere. Holmes's palm descended lightly upon the door, not to force, but to be there. "Allow me," he said, and the courtesy was iron. "Inspector Lestrade will receive that presently. Until then, it is safer where it lies." His eyes flicked to me. "Watson, I stepped forward, and in that instant a cry rose from the far end of the corridor, the sharp, outraged exclamation of a woman who is accustomed to obedience and has found defiance instead. Mrs. Vandeleur swept upon us, morning silk whispering, face white, save for 2 high flags at the cheek. Behind her came Rivington, pale and pinched, and last, Baines, who had not left his post at the stair, but had nevertheless followed his mistress at a pace that could check without quite defying. "What is this?" she demanded. Her gaze darted to the little book in Renton's hand, to Holmes, to Locke, who, poor fellow, shrank into himself at the sight of her, as if she were winter given human shape. "Give me that." "No," said Miss Renton, and the single syllable was not rebellion so much as exhaustion. The mask had slipped. Beneath it was not malice, but the trembling self-importance of a woman who has been long used and at last sees the bill. "Madame, Holmes spared her the need. "Madame, you will presently explain to Inspector Lestrade why your secretary's ledgers bear the initials R.R. beside entries that emptied your sister's accounts to float your ventures. You will also explain why Riv present appears where the sums are greatest. Dr. Rivington, your answer will interest the medical council scarcely less than the magistrate." Rivington bristled, but the bristle died as his eyes fell, not on Holmes, not on me, but on Locke. Something passed between them, a recognition or a memory, and the doctor's gaze dropped. "I acted on instructions," he murmured. "You will act now upon mine," said a crisp voice from the stair. "Inspector Lestrade, Metropolitan Police." Our old acquaintance appeared at the turn, brisk, compact, his keen eye taking in at a glance the tableau, the ladies, the servants, Holmes with one hand upon a door, myself between, the little book gleaming like a guilty conscience in Miss Renton's fingers. Behind him stood a constable, and beyond 2 more shapes moved in the hall. "Morning, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade with businesslike cheer. "You sent me the most interesting note. I've a clerk waiting at Harbury and Knight to verify some numbers. I make no doubt they'll fit like a glove. In the meantime, we'll keep matters pleasant, shall we?" His eyes settled upon Mrs. Vandeleur. "Ma'am?" She drew herself up, the very picture of outraged virtue. "Inspector, you will remove these men from my house." "That's as may be," Lestrade returned evenly. "Just now, I've a duty to prevent any removal from your house without consent of the person removed. Dr. Rivington, you'll oblige me by putting that valise upon the floor. Miss Renton, if you please." The book. For a heartbeat, the secretary hesitated. Then with a small sound, half sob, half sigh, she laid the ledger in Lestrade's hand. Something in her seemed to fold then, like a paper, after its uses have been read. Holmes, who misses nothing, inclined his head the least shade, as one bows to a fallen adversary who has chosen at last the straighter road. From within the blue room there came the faintest call, a woman's voice, uncertain but awake. It was not loud, it did not need to be. Every head turned toward that sound. Mrs. Vandeleur's fingers tightened upon her handkerchief until the knuckles showed. For the first time, a tremor ran through her imperious figure. Holmes's face softened. He looked to me. "Watson." I was already at the door. Clara Vandeleur's eyes were open. They were the eyes of one who has been long at sea and has just sighted a shore she had half forgotten existed. She saw the ribbon upon the coverlet. Her hand moved to it, and with that small motion her mouth quivered into the ghost of a smile. "You are safe," I said. "You shall choose for yourself now." Behind me, Holmes's voice, calm and cool as a surgeon's instruments laid in order, pronounced the next step. "Inspector, we shall want the doctor's prescriptions, the chemist's register, and a hansom to Pall Mall. If my reading of the blotter is correct, Harbury and Knight will enlarge our circle of acquaintance by 1 manager and 2 tellers, none of whom will wish to share Mrs. Vandeleur's fate. By luncheon, we shall have the last signature placed in its proper light." Lestrade made a short, satisfied sound. The game had turned, and turned cleanly. Yet I felt, as I often have at this stage in our adventures, that Holmes's gaze was already upon the next move, not the one concluded. As I adjusted the pillow and the maid straightened the sheet, I heard him say softly, to no one in particular, "There remains, Watson, the matter of our silent messenger. Courage once borrowed must be repaid. Before this day ends, we shall see that Mr. Edward Locke's voice is no longer a thing that can be used to hurt him." Lestrade lost no time in sending his constable to the chemist, and another to stand easy at the front, but he had the sense, as always when Holmes's hand was upon the tiller, to ask, "Pall Mall first, or the chemist, Mr. Holmes?" "The bank," Holmes replied. "Money leaves a sharper imprint than laudanum. Watson, your cloak. Locke, you come with us as far as the corner, then wait. I shall return you your courage in coin. You can spend." Clara Vandeleur, propped upon pillows, had turned her face to the window with that arrested, listening look of the newly reprieved. Holmes paused at her door as we passed. "By luncheon, madam," he said, his voice low and even, "your accounts shall be your own again. Do not fear any carriage that stops before this house. It will be ours." She inclined her head, and the faintest colour showed at her cheek. The morning held that thin, watery brightness which seems peculiar to London after a night of fog, as though the sun had been strained through muslin. In the cab, Holmes sat forward, his eyes on the traffic with a fixedness that was not attention but calculation running beneath it like a second river. Lestrade, opposite him, had his notebook out and his pencil poised. He was in excellent spirits, having the warm sense of a case which promises both justice and paperwork. For myself, I confess the events of the night sat upon me like an unquiet dream, and I was glad to feel the city's mundane clatter assert itself. Harbury and Knight presented the discreet, affluent frontage of a house that prides itself upon never surprising anyone who matters. A porter, whose whiskers might have served as a ledger's marginalia, admitted us to a cool, high room where a manager of the older school, Mr. Ashe, a man as dry as vellum and as precise, received Lestrade's card with the measured attention of one weighing an unfamiliar coin. "Inspector," he said, "your clerk is in my back room. With Mr. Bridger, certain numbers did indeed invite inquiry. If you would be pleased—" His glance took in Holmes with an aloof civility that warmed by a degree when Lestrade pronounced the name. We were conducted to a small office where a thin, ferret-eyed teller, Bridger, sat with a sheaf of cheques spread before him like a pack cut for a conjurer. He rose, nervous and eager to be exact, "And these are the instruments, sir." Cheques drawn upon the private account of Miss Clara Vandeleur, all within the last 3 months, payable to bearer or to household reserve, that is, to the firm's cashier for cashing. The entries are regular, the numbers consecutive, save for 3, which were stopped upon instruction here. You see the stamps? He laid his clean nail precisely upon the ovals. Protested, funds withheld pending inquiry. "And the instructions?" Holmes asked. "Presented by Miss Renton," Ashe said, answering where his subordinate did not dare. "A secretary attached to the Vandeleur household. She is known to us. We have taken her authority to present at the counter when the lady is indisposed." Holmes's eye, that unrivalled ledger of men's faces, noted the small contraction at indisposed. "You have her signature on file?" "We have," Ashe said, and produced a card. Below the neat R. Renton, 2 other hands had attested the introduction, F. Vandeleur, and in a narrow medical script, Abel Rivington. M.D. Holmes examined the signatures in silence, then looked up. "On which occasions, Mr. Ashe, did you require Miss Clara's own signature or presence?" The manager drew himself a fraction, as if summoned to defend a professional doctrine. "It is not our custom to inconvenience a lady of standing when a responsible member of the household bears proper introduction. Mr. Holmes, we serve families, not mere accounts." "Just so," said Holmes with a blandness that made Lestrade's pencil scratch more cheerily. "A family, then, asked you to accept sums to replenish a household reserve. A family secretary presented. A family physician witnessed. You imagined you were respecting propriety when you were in fact assisting a fraud. Do not be affronted. The weapon used was your best habit. Trust. Ash's colour rose. He was a man who would endure an accusation of theft more easily than one of want of prudence, but he kept his temper. If you say fraud, sir, you must show it. With pleasure. Holmes took from his pocket the sheet on which he had coaxed the figures from the blotter. He laid it beside the checks. The numbers marched down the paper like soldiers beside their colours. Here are the same sums, Mr. Ash, copied last night by the woman who presented them to you with her own initials and the charming notations, by instruction of Mrs. F. Vandeleur and Dr. Present, where the draft was to be doubled at home. That ledger, now in Inspector Lestrade's custody, corresponds in every line. Fraud need not be noisy to be complete. Ash's lips compressed. He reread twice, then rang for a clerk and issued a series of brisk directions whose very economy told me he was stung at the root of his craft, his caution. When the door had closed, he said, in a tone as near to apology as a banker grants the world, "What is required of us?" "For the present," Lestrade said, satisfied, "a formal statement of processes, who presented, who countersigned, what identification was accepted. You will also be so good as to suspend any instrument presented by Miss Renton, Mrs. Vandeleur, or Dr. Rivington pending my written release. And if you can spare Mr. Bridger, I will have him at Kensington by noon." Bridger blinked, flushed with pride and dread in equal measure. Ash bowed. "We will assist in whatever is proper." "If our practices have been used," he did not finish. "A gentleman does not allude to being made a fool more than the minimum number of times." Outside, Holmes drew a long breath, more of quickened interest than relief. "One artery closed," he said. "Now the apothecaries. A case is never concluded by money alone. One must follow the draft to the lips." The chemist's shop in the Brompton Road had that spotless, faintly ecclesiastical air peculiar to good chemists, glass like crystal, brass like gold, and the odour of clean poisons. A young man with earnest hair received Lestrade's name as if it were a tonic. "You supplied a mixture labelled chloral hydrate, 1 teaspoon at night, to the order of Dr. Abel Rivington," Lestrade began. The young man produced the book without a murmur. Entries bloomed there in the precise brown of a good iron gall ink. One could have ruled one's morals by those lines. "Yes, Inspector. 4 bottles in the last fortnight. The formula is here. We have added orange tincture as the patient, a lady, complained of bitterness." "Who collected?" "Miss Renton, sir," the youth said, glad to be exact. "At times a maid. Once." He hesitated, then, cheered by Lestrade's nod, went on. "Once the butler." The doctor's card accompanied the first order. Holmes touched the page with a fingertip. "You see the addition here? Sodium carbonate in quantity. Not necessary to mask taste if orange is added. That was not yours." The youth coloured. "No, sir. We compounded strictly to order. If carbonate was added, it was added after it left us." Lestrade shut the book with a pleased smack. "Thank you. Keep yourself free this afternoon. A gentleman from the council may wish to examine your register." When we regained the street, Holmes's face had that look, alert, almost austere, that always presaged a move played not upon the board we could see, but upon the one he saw beneath it. "2 channels choked," he said. "There remains a third, the carriage. Watson, do you recall the tread, narrow, new, iron, and the driver's posture, anonymous by instruction, not by trade? That brougham does not serve the family in daylight. It serves the home to which Mrs. Vandeleur meant to consign her sister. If we cut the artery there, the whole scheme collapses into its origin. Saint." "John's Wood," I said. "You spoke of it in the night." "Saint? John's Wood? Finchley Road, Hampstead, there are a dozen houses where ladies are soothed into legality. But money and habit find each other. There is one establishment that receives such cases when they are private rather than public, St. Gertrude's on Arkwright Road. The matron there is a Mrs. Latch, Pious, punctual, businesslike. Lestrade, will you humour me? Send a man to sit at the gates. If a dark brougham with new shoes arrives with a physician's card upon the cushion, detain it upon your authority until I come. Lestrade had known Holmes too long to ask how he conjured the name from fog. He dispatched a constable at once. And now, Holmes said, with a quiet satisfaction that made me think of violin strings tuned, we return to Kensington. I require 2 rooms, a table, and a bell. We shall set a little stage upon which Providence may, if it be in a good humour, descend in a white cravat. We found the household as we had left it, save that the air of injured majesty had ebbed from Mrs. Vandeleur's chamber, leaving a gaunt composure that was more dangerous. Miss Renton had withdrawn to the library and sat there with folded hands, like a figure waiting for a verdict already known. Locke, summoned from the corner where Holmes had bidden him wait, stood with his eyes down, his throat working. Lestrade posted his men with the instinctive tidiness that is half his success. Holmes ordered tea for the servants and had it sent, not to the kitchen, but to the hall, where its very presence created a little republic of whispered wonder. Now, he said softly, we play our last 2 moves before luncheon. He had a chair set in a small morning room, its door upon the corridor that led to the blue chamber. Upon the chair he placed his hat and cane and a folded newspaper. Upon the table he laid the chemist's label, the recovered blotter sheet, and the bank's clerk's card. Then he sent Baines with a message, not to the mistress, but to Miss Renton. Mrs. Vandeleur requests the blue ledger at once to be shown to Dr. Rivington. She will come, he said to me, when Baines had gone. Not because she means to obey, but because she means to control the book's last journey. Stand here, Watson, so that you may see her face as she crosses the threshold. She came with the step of fatigue, disguised as resolve. The little book held close, the jaw set as if pain might be borne into righteousness by clenching. She took in the table at a glance, the papers, the bank card, and the light in her eyes altered by a shade. Fear, then calculation, then a stiffening into the familiar shelter of obedience. Mrs. Vandeleur is not here, she said. She will be, Holmes returned. In the meantime, will you tell me why your initials RR appear beside entries where the sums are largest? Because I carried them, she said with an attempt at dryness that the dryness of our evidence parched. Because someone must. And because you believed the household depended upon it, Holmes said very mildly. It is an argument that has covered 1,000 sins in London. Allow me to relieve you of the burden. The household will eat, the tradesmen will be paid, and you will sleep, Miss Renton. But for that, you must do one thing not tidy at all. You must tell the truth. Her hand upon the little ledger trembled. She looked past Holmes, almost as if she sought Mrs. Vandeleur's eye and could not find it. Then the door opened, and that lady entered, colourless, but composed, Rivington behind her, with the pinched dignity of a man who has found reputations fickle. "Inspector," Mrs. Vandeleur said, with a calm that had the strain lines of a bridge at full load, "I must protest this invasion. My solicitor has been sent for," Lestrade said, crisp and civil. "He may find us at luncheon." In the meantime, no one leaves and nothing is removed. Holmes stood, not between them, but a little aside, as a man stands to watch 2 clouds meet. He said nothing. Silence, which had brought us to Baker Street, now served him again. The room filled with it, an honest silence, heavy, expectant. The sound that broke it was small, a knock at the outer door, cautious, businesslike. Baines moved, Lestrade signed. A constable admitted Mr. Bridger, the ferret-eyed bank clerk, clutching a sealed envelope, and, behind him, the young chemist, pink with purpose. Holmes inclined his head. "Gentlemen, be so good as to stand here. Presently you will identify certain signatures and entries. Mrs. Vandeleur's mantle of command slipped by a button." "What melodrama is this?" she demanded, her voice lowering a shade. "Mr. Holmes, you exceed your remit." "My remit," Holmes said with an almost bored gentleness, extends precisely as far as necessary to prevent harm. We have prevented it, now we explain it. You will find, madam, that explanations are less elastic than scruples. There came then a second knock, firmer, official. Lestrade nodded to his man, and the door opened upon a matronly woman in a plain bonnet whose eyes had the cold sheen of pewter, Mrs. Latch of St. Gertrude's, and a constable behind her with a hand upon the arm of a driver whose anonymity had been peeled away by daylight. "Beg pardon, Inspector," the constable said, satisfaction lurking like a cat in his voice. "Dark brougham at the gate as ordered. This is the lady who sent for it. The driver says he was engaged by the month. There are papers in the pocket, admissions and such." Mrs. Vandeleur, for the first time, wavered. Not like a guilty woman at bay, but like a proud one suddenly shown the mirror. It was Miss Renton who moved. She gave a small, strangled sound and set the ledger down upon the table with hands that shook now without disguise. "No more," she said, and the dryness had gone. A weary human voice remained. "I have done what I was told because I believed it must be done. I will not do more." She turned to her mistress with a desperation that was almost devotion. "Madam, for your sake, it must end." In that instant, a small one, but they matter. "Doctor." Rivington's nerve failed where hers had found a ragged strength. He slumped, his eyes sliding from person to person as if seeking a perch and finding none. "I witnessed," he said dully. "I did not." He gestured, helpless. "She pressed me. There were investments, promises. If the sister were, if—" The words withered. Lestrade, who is no man's confessor and many a man's deliverer from himself, wrote twice, snapped his book, and said simply, "That will do." Holmes's head turned slightly. His gaze lit upon Locke, who had stood by the door like a man in church at a funeral not his own. "Mr. Locke," he said, and his voice had in it that unexpected warmth which never fails to move me. "You have a statement to make. You will give it now, aloud, in this room, so that no one mistakes what courage sounds like." The valet's lips parted. For a moment I feared the old fetter would seize him. Then he looked not at Mrs. Vandeleur, not at Miss Renton, but at the corridor, where, beyond the turn, a pale woman lay with a ribbon in her hand. He drew a breath that seemed to tear, and spoke. "I took the first note," he said, his voice low, but true. "I kept the others. I saw Miss Renton bring cheques and make Miss Clara sign when she was not herself. I carried the bottles from the chemist and watched them poured when the lady begged for water. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid. I am afraid now, but I have said it. It was not eloquence. It did not need to be. The sound of it, his sound, altered the room's shape. Mrs. Vandeleur's chin lifted, as if defiance could send the words back into his throat. It could not. Lestrade nodded once, not unkindly. The bank clerk made a small, involuntary movement, like a bow. The young chemist swallowed hard and stood straighter. Holmes let the silence that followed settle as one lets a sheet fall upon a bed, smooth, inevitable. Then he said without triumph, "Inspector, you have all you need. The hand that wrote, the hand that signed, the hand that poured, the wheel that waited, the gate that would have shut. The rest is for your courts and councils. Watson, we will see our patient." As we passed into the corridor, I heard behind me the first small clatter of official business, the scrape of chairs, the murmur of names, Lestrade's dry tenor giving shape to acts. Before us, the blue. Room's light lay on the carpet like a calm pool. Clara Vandeleur, when we entered, looked at us with that grave, incredulous gratitude of the long beset. Holmes, who in victory can be almost shy, stood a moment at the foot of the bed, as if acknowledging not applause but a life persisted in. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice was stronger than I expected. "I wrote that someone should bring a kind voice. I did not think—" She halted, the words trembling between thanks and disbelief. It was not mine that mattered, Holmes answered gently. It was Mr. Locke's. You will remember it when others ask you to forget. She closed her eyes once, then opened them and fixed them on the window where the weak sun made a pale square upon the blind. May I sign my own letters now? You may, said Holmes, and for the first time that day I saw him smile, not at the puzzle complete, but at a simple thing set right. Holmes remained only long enough to see Clara take a few spoonfuls of broth and address, at his suggestion, a short line to her solicitor in Brook Street, stating in her own hand that she was awake, uncoerced, and desired that no step be taken in her name without her personal assent. He placed the note in my pocketbook. Ink speaks with a voice even the law respects, he said. Now we shall deal with the other voices in this affair, those that have written too much and said too little. Lestrade, planted like a compact watchman in the hall, had already arranged his men as neatly as a set of drafts. Rivington's gone quiet, he observed. He sits in the morning room like a man at the dentist's waiting for the drill. The lady of the house rings for matters that do not arrive, let the ache ripen, Holmes returned. Presently, when it can be borne no longer, it will yield everything. Watson, you will go with Lestrade to Brook Street and put Miss Clara's note in her solicitor's hand. If Mrs. Vandeleur has set her petition in motion, a telephone bell will be busy by now. The first hand upon the instrument must be ours. Afterward, meet me in Harley Street at Dr. Rivington's rooms. I shall see whether his day-book keeps a better conscience than its master. He did not wait for reply. With one of those sudden evaporations of his, he was gone down the stair and out by the mews before Mrs. Vandeleur's footman, crossing the hall with a salver, knew that he had passed. Lestrade and I were not long in reaching Brook Street. The firm's senior, Mr. Thurlow, proved to be one of those dry, benevolent solicitors whose humanity is all the stronger for being clothed in parchment. He read Clara's line twice, nodded once, and touched a bell. Mrs. Vandeleur sent a clerk here at 9, he said. We declined to entertain her petition pending evidence. I am glad to have the evidence from the proper hand. You may inform your inspector that no order of restraint will issue from this office. If the lady wishes trusteeship for certain investments, that is another matter, but she shall wish it for herself, not have it wished upon her. Convey to Miss Clara my compliments and the assurance that her signature and hers alone will move us. I left with a weight lifted. We met again at the corner of Harley Street, where a neat brass plate announced, Dr. Abel Rivington's melancholy respectability. Holmes was upon the step, his gloved finger resting idly upon the bell, as if debating whether to ring, his eyes fixed not on the knocker, but on the tradesman's entrance opposite. He returned half an hour ago by the back, he remarked, when he saw us. The housemaid's pail told me so, wet rim, in a ring where it has stood on the scullery stone, and no dew upon the doctor's gate latch. When a man who lives by the front door comes in by the rear, he means to carry something out that does not love daylight. Come, the maid, when she opened to us, had the affronted air peculiar to servants who suspect scandal and hope to be spared the particulars. At sight of Lestrade's warrant card, her dignity became convenience. The doctor's with a patient, sir, she ventured. Holmes's nostrils made that small movement I have seen when a faint scent reaches him across a broad river of pretence. Not in his surgery, he returned. He is in his study with a fire too brisk for the season. If we delay, the patient will be the hearth. So it proved. We found Rivington in a snug back room where the grate roared like a forge. His long fingers, that had never been stained by honest labour, were at that moment engaged in an occupation more perilous than any surgical procedure. A sheaf of papers lay upon the fender, the topmost already browned. At sight of us, he made a movement to thrust them further in, then checked himself, miserably aware of how theatrical guilt must look when taken by the elbow. Lestrade's man was over the grate in a stride. "If you please, sir." He flicked the topmost sheet aside with the poker and drew the rest to safety. Holmes, who had glanced once and seen enough, took the rescued bundle in hand. The top bore a neat title in Rivington's hand, Private Consultations, by introduction. Beneath ran a list, dates, initials, sums. Opposite 3 entries the name Saint. Gertrude's Arkwright Road appeared, and on the far margin, in a different ink, 4 receipts were pinned, their amounts neatly echoed in Mrs. Latch's tidy hand. Holmes's brows rose, not from surprise, but at the elegance of the confession. "You were industrious, Doctor," he observed. 1 guinea for the draft, 5 for the certificate, 10 on admission, a douceur upon each month's maintenance, a tidy annuity if the lady's nerves could be persuaded to hold out. Rivington's mouth twitched. For a second the true man peered from behind the professional mask, a hesitating, greedy creature whose poor pride had made him easy prey to richer vices. "I am not the only physician in London who—" "Receives a fee from a home for sending it customers," Holmes finished for him, ice calm. "No, but most of them take care that the customers go of their own legs. You, sir, permit your name to varnish a method that, to be plain, would have killed your patient by inches and left your bank book honest. That is a refinement, Lestrade, who has no relish for professional niceties. Where a prisoner's carriage is concerned, put his pencil through 3 dates and wrote in the margin, 'To counsel.' Then, with the practical instinct that has saved many a case from becoming philosophy, he pocketed the ledger, the receipts, and 2 sealed bottles which the maid, now frankly fascinated, fetched from a locked press at his request. "You will attend at the Yard at 3, he told the doctor. "If you fail to do so, I shall apply for a warrant." "I advise you not to test my patience." Rivington sat down. The fire, so bravely stoked to destroy his account, exhaled the faint, sickly perfume of violets that had clung, a talisman of an imagined gentility, even to his crimes. It turned my stomach more than the chloral had. When we regained Kensington, the house had shifted its posture. Mrs. Vandeleur had grown composed again by the alchemy of habit. She sat in the drawing-room with a piece of embroidery that did not advance. Miss Renton, white but erect, awaited summons in the library. Lestrade had set his clerk from Harbury and Knight in a corner with a sheaf of cancelled cheques and the air of one who is, for once, on the right side of a story. Mrs. Latch had prudently retired to a cab, the better to tell later how she had presented herself boldly and been rebuked only by law more bold. Holmes took the morning room once more and set upon the table the doctor's book and receipts beside the figures from the blotter. "We have the line entire," he said, almost to himself. "From a frightened hand upon a private leaf to a porter's book in a private home. From a draft masked like charity to a cheque masked like duty. When fraud arrays itself in the livery of virtues, nothing undresses it like a ledger." He sent for Miss Renton, but when she entered, there was less of the inquisitor in his manner than earlier. One would have said he had taken a resolution. "Miss Renton," he said, "you will make a written statement of what you have done under instruction, and of the sums you have paid at your mistress's order. You will do so now, in your hand, and you will initial each page. In return, Inspector Lestrade will allow your solicitor to be present when you are examined, and will note that you were the first to produce the ledger. If you add to that a letter written by you to Miss Clara, acknowledging that you interfered with her correspondence and her rest, I think, even in London, you may find employment again in a house where the rule is kindness." She stared at him, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of the woman she might have been if she had learned sooner that the won battles of order are not worth the lost wars of pity. "You offer me consideration?" she said. "Why?" "Because you are not the architect," Holmes returned gravely. "You are the better tool. It is a pity to break good steel when the hand that misused it can be pried open." She bowed her head. "I will write." He sent her paper. When she had gone, Mrs. Vandeleur herself appeared, as if some tremor in the house had warned her that words were being set down which would continue to speak when doors had closed upon her. She paused upon the threshold, took in the papers, the receipts, Lestrade's ready pencil, and Holmes's quiet face, and understood at last that her dominion, which had for years been mistress of everything within her walls, had at last met something that did not reside there. She made one attempt more, because pride requires its ritual. "You think me a monster," she said, the calmness of it more chilling than any cry. "I did what I must. My husband left me. Debts. My sister squanders. The world expects a lady to keep her station. If I had let the house fall, the same world would have crucified me upon its gossip. You condemn me for preserving what all of you insist I preserve." Holmes's expression did not soften. "What you preserved, madam," he said, "was not a house, but your idea of yourself within it. It is an expensive piece of china. It has cost you a sister. I am sorry for you, but I am not so sorry that I shall permit you to break another cup." It was the nearest thing to a sermon I have ever heard him deliver. She did not answer. She turned, passed into the hall, and, for the first time in that house, I heard Mrs. Vandeleur give an order that was not obeyed. Baines, with quiet respect, informed her that the carriage would not be brought round until Inspector Lestrade so directed. I confess I liked the man the better for the way in which he turned his old habit, obedience, toward its best use. We went once more to the Blue Room. Clara Vandeleur had sat up. Her hair, plaited by the maid, fell in a dark rope upon her shoulder. She looked less like an invalid now than a woman who has come through a fever of other people's making. Upon the sheet lay the sky-blue ribbon. She touched it once, while Holmes told her, in a few words, what had been done and what remained. "You will have callers," he concluded, with a half-smile that took the sting from the catalogue. "Your solicitor first, then the bank's manager, who will apologize in language so proper that you will not at first recognize it for an apology, then perhaps a lady who will ask forgiveness. You may give it or not. The law requires only your signature in your own hand upon your own decisions. That is your physic. Take it steadily." She regarded him, and in her gaze there was that odd mixture I have seen before in those who have been saved by him, not gratitude alone, nor wonder, but a kind of shock at a world in which such minds rummage in one's life and put it to rights without asking leave. "You speak as if you put pieces in a drawer," she said, "but they were people." "They were," Holmes returned. "That is why the drawer must be orderly." When we descended, Lestrade met us with the air of a man who has the day by the right end. "Your Brook Street gentleman has telephoned," he said. "No petition will be lodged. The bank is as penitent as a curate. The chemist's boy has given a statement. And Dr. Rivington sits in a room with a calendar and stares at June as if he had never seen a month before." "And our brougham?" Holmes inquired. "At the yard, with a wheel off. The driver says he was engaged for a fortnight at a time, always on late watch. He will sing for his supper at 4. Holmes nodded, satisfied, and then, with a glance about him as if seeking something that was not under the roof, said, "Where is Locke?" The valet had kept to the background with the humility of those who have learned their height from standing against too many walls. He came now at Lestrade's beck. Holmes regarded him as a physician might a patient, whose case, though cured, still requires aftercare. "You have done your part," he said. "Now you shall do mine. You will remain in the house today until Miss Clara herself dismisses you or keeps you, as she chooses. Tomorrow you will come to Baker Street at 10. I know a gentleman in Belgrave Square whose household requires a valet of uncommon discretion. If you choose to go, I will send you with a letter. If you choose to stay, I will send you with another to Mr. Ash at Harbury and Knight, who will make it known in the proper ears that your silence was the last thing you unlearned." Locke, who had given so few words to the world, attempted to frame one now and failed. He bowed instead, and in the bow there was something no court could order and no ledger record, liberty, awkward, dignified, and his. Holmes took up his hat. "Come, Watson." Lunch, and then a small recital. "Lestrade, at 6, I will lay the whole upon a single line for you in a way even your counsel may quote without wincing. Until then, keep your singers in their cages and your notes in their pockets. As we turned out into the pale day, I could not help but say, "You will tell me, Holmes, why you were so sure last night of every step. The blue ledger before we had seen it, the home before we had named it, the bank before we had asked it." He smiled, that small inward smile of his, which is less a display of pleasure than an economy of it. "You observed, but you did not connect, my dear fellow. It is not your fault. The string is the least glittering part of a necklace. Tonight, when the house is quiet and Baker Street less so, I will give you the string. You shall see how a silent man, a scent of violet, a grain of salt, and a brougham with new shoes talk as plainly as any witness at the Old Bailey, if one but asks them in the right order. We ate little and spoke less, for Holmes, when the threads are all in his hands and only the plating remains, withdraws into that inward absorption which no food or jest can enliven. It was near 6 by the clock when we reached Baker Street and found Lestrade already in our sitting-room, compact and trim, with that air of cheerful fatigue which a successful morning bestows upon the diligent. "It goes cleanly," said he, tapping his notebook. "Mrs. Vandeleur is to be charged, on my superintendent's advice, conspiracy to defraud and to administer a noxious thing with intent. Rivington will answer before his counsel and then before a magistrate. The bank has issued a very penitent letter, and Miss Renton writes, 'Mr. Holmes as steadily as any clerk in Whitehall. As for the brougham, the driver owns to a month's ready money and orders always to wait at night by the Mews. It is as neat a case as I have carried to Bow Street since your Milverton business.'" Holmes inclined his head with that indifferent courtesy which is his nearest approach to pleasure. He stood a moment with his back to the fire, his eyes upon the smoke as it wound upward. "You have your evidence," he said. "Permit me to add the string on which the beads are threaded. You will be the better able to keep them from rolling when counsel meddles." Lestrade settled himself, the very picture of reasonable attention. I took my usual chair by the table, where our relics of the night lay. The chemist's label, the sky-blue ribbon with its single glass bead, and the faintly gritty scrap of torn paper. Holmes took up none of them. He spoke as one who has already handled all that can be handled, and now recites the memorized score. "The case announced itself not by what was said, but by what was not," he began. "A man enters my rooms, and in a city where tongues are coins, spends none. He insists upon writing, he avoids the light. He asks to ride upon the box. These, taken alone, might pass for foreign habit or timidity. But set beside his cuffs, darned with silk too fine for a labourer, the polish upon his boots, and the repose of his hands, the hands of one trained to be looked at without being seen, and your valet stands confessed. Why silent? Not because he does not trust us. His entire action bespeaks desperation sufficient to trust anything with a door. No, he fears his voice, not his words. Who recognizes a voice? A mistress, a lady of a house. Therefore, his enemy, if we must use that term, is a woman near him who listens. Lestrade nodded. "So far, Mr. Holmes, you run where I should plod. The rest?" "The paper," Holmes continued. It bore a watermark, Westbury and Sons, Kensington High Street, too costly for a servant's pocket, common in certain drawing-rooms in that quarter. The ink was poor, the paper fine, a pretension overlaid upon thrift. The words would before dawn argued a timetable set to sleeping hours, not to a steamer's sailing or a train's departure. "Then your nose, Watson?" "No." "Mine, then?" Found violet and vetiver upon the page, fashionable and feminine, with carbolic in the undertone, nursery or surgery. Add to that the faint grit at the fold, pumice used by delicate fingers, and the picture sharpens, a lady civilized to the bones, frightened into haste, in a house where medicine and gentility walk oddly, arm in arm. "Very good," said Lestrade, satisfied. Now the Mews, the salt, the soot. Holmes's eye warmed a fraction. Our cab paused at the Mews. While our guide disappeared, I employed the universal magnifier taste and a lens. Within the crease of the note, a grain of sea salt had lodged. London furnishes salt enough, but not of that fineness, unless a cook dissolves it in pans. A kitchen, proud of its Frenchified methods, then. Upon the paper's corner, a smear of coke soot, modern furnaces. Here we have a house with money passing through it, though the hands are old in habit, I mean. The window above the blue room showed an arc wiped through condensation. A hand had gone out into the night. Why? To drop something to a ledge where a friend below might find it. We fished up our ribbon and our plea, and that, with the impression beneath the D in dawn, gave me your Miss Renton as watcher and deputy. Lestrade looked up from his pencil. You mean you had the secretary before you knew her name? I had her type, Holmes returned. An educated woman of the stern sort, with the ink upon her forefinger and the bridge of her nose reddened by spectacles. She would take order for virtue itself and enforce it as soldiers enforce drill. Such women are dangerous when they are badly led and invaluable when they are well. Make a note of that. Society neglects to heap haste once to the window and back. When we saw the room, the rest followed. 2 glasses, one rinsed, one with the milky crescent of a narcotic draught. The bell pull looped to the watcher's chair, the key upon the ribbon signifying custody, the book marked with pious slips to steady a conscience that longed to be mechanical. We allowed the midnight change because I wished to see the hand that would pour when the mistress was absent. A forged indulgence, our penciled, if restless, repeat, gave Miss Renton sanction to betray herself, and she used it as such natures do. The written word absolves them. Once I had watched her reach for that card, we could take the glass and stay the dose and know that, if we woke the house upon it, the truth would stand up even in its night-clothes. Lestrade chuckled, his pencil idle now. You were devilish with that card. Diabolus ex graffito, Holmes said with a ghost of a smile. But the devil is always in the habit, Inspector. The habit of trusting a script and distrusting a voice, the habit of a bank that respects a family more than a person, the habit of a doctor who likes his private door better than his surgery. When habit binds the wicked together, one must cut in 3 places. We cut at Pall Mall, we cut at the chemist, we cut at St. Gertrude's Gate. Your men did their office shrewdly. The rest was a matter of leading the lady to meet her own instruments. She brought her doctor, she would have brought her carriage, she called for her ledger, and it answered a name it had not foreseen. And your blue book, said Lestrade. How did you nose that out before we had the room? By the best detective of all, an honest fear. Miss Clara's note said, I have always kept my own book. There is a blue ledger. She hides it. A frightened mind holds fast to one clear noun. She did not write accounts or papers. She wrote blue ledger. I have rarely known such a phrase to mislead me. When we found the blotter's impression, the rest was a clerk's task. Lestrade shut his notebook with an air of contentment. You draw the picture as neat as a print. There is one corner I still do not see, a small one, but I like the edges tight. Your first visitor, the valet, why such terror of his voice? You said a mistress would know it. Is that all? Holmes seated himself, steepled his fingers, and regarded the ceiling as one might a violoncello passage one has long known and still admires. No, he said softly. There is more. A human thing. It is the motive that put the first step upon the road. Mr. Locke is not merely a servant. He is the son of a woman who nursed the Vandeleur sisters when they were children. He has served in that house since boyhood. He is not only known there, he is remembered. The mistress, Fanny, would know his voice among 100 because she has heard it since she was 15. He feared, too, that if he spoke to us, he might speak too much to her. Such ties are chains, Inspector, but they do not run to the wrists. They run to the heart. He chose to be silent so that he might be loyal to 2 ladies at once, the right and the wrong. Last night he learned that a man cannot be loyal to cruelty, and to kindness together. This morning he found his voice for the right one. It is a better epilogue than Bow Street can write Lestrade, who has a stout little heart under his regulation coat, looked away, made some observation about an appointment, and took himself off with many thanks and few compliments. When the door had closed, Holmes stood a moment by the mantel, then reached for his violin and tuned a string so delicately that I felt more than heard the fine assent it gave. "You will write it, Watson," said he, "and call it what you please. You may even say that I guessed Saint. Gertrude's out of thin air if it flatters your readers. In truth, it was the new shoes upon the brougham and the driver's. Posture. The fellow sat as one hired to wait, not to serve. That, and a little list I keep of private homes where a lady may be stripped of her pen before she is stripped of her name. It is an ugly register, but useful. I had the pen in my hand already, and I confess the habit, one of those to which Holmes had alluded, took me. "What of Clara?" I asked, "and of Mrs. Vandeleur, and poor Miss Renton?" "The law will not break its heart upon any of them," said he. "Clara will dismiss the doctor and keep the maid who wept. She will forgive enough to sleep. Mrs. Vandeleur will think me a vulgar fellow who does not understand the burdens of a lady. She will have leisure to write it down. Miss Renton will go to an aunt in Surbiton and keep a small household in exemplary order until some honest family, who prefer a quiet mind to a quiet table, engages her. As for Mr. Locke—" He paused, poised the bow, and let it fall very softly upon the string. The note that came was so low and steady that it seemed less sound than brother to silence. "As for Mr. Locke," he repeated, "he will knock at this door at 10 tomorrow, and I shall send him to a gentleman who values discretion above livery. There he will learn that a voice is a tool, not a trap. It will do him no harm." We sat thus for some minutes, the fire openly cheerful now, that it need no longer keep secrets for frightened men. Presently our door opened, and Mrs. Hudson, that best of housekeepers, set in a tray with the air of one reconciling herself to mysteries on condition that teacups do not suffer. Among the letters she brought was a thin blue one addressed in a woman's hand. Holmes tossed it across to me with an indifferent flick. I opened it. It was from Clara Vandeleur, a single line as delicate and unadorned as the note she had written in her sick-room. "Tell Mr. Holmes that I have signed, for myself, and that I thank the man who did not speak." Holmes, who pretends to care for no man's verdict, put down the bow and took the slip between finger and thumb. The faintest smile touched his mouth. "Do you know, Watson," said he, "there are cases in which the neatest thing is not a deduction but an omission? Had I forced that man to talk last night at my table, he would have betrayed himself to the wrong ears by breakfast. By keeping his silence intact until it could be spent safely, we bought him, and her, time. People think detection is a matter of what one says. It is, 9 times in 10, a matter of when one does not." He set the paper upon the mantel, took up the violin in earnest, and, with an air of one content to leave the world for a little to its own debates, drew from it a melody so quiet that the fog beyond our window seemed to lean inward to listen. The days that followed moved with the measured certainty of a clock set right. Lestrade's machine clattered forward, summonses served, statements taken, receipts initialed, and the sordid scheme that had prowled under violet scent and household propriety stood in daylight to be examined like any common thief. I shall not weary the reader with forms and depositions. It will suffice to say that by week's end Mrs. Vandeleur had appeared before a magistrate, grave and unbending, to hear charges of conspiracy to defraud and of administering a noxious substance with intent. That doctor. Abel Rivington, with his melancholy respectability reduced to a narrow strip, had presented himself to the medical council and heard his name entered upon a list no gentleman of physic would willingly see, and that Miss Renton, having furnished a confession in a hand that never wavered, awaited her fate with a composure that was at last not armour, but acceptance. It was in our own rooms on an afternoon when the winter dusk drew down early and the street's noises softened as though the fog had been laid upon them like wool, that Holmes set the case into that order which only he can achieve. He had not touched his violin that day. Instead, he sat before the fire with his fingers steepled and his gaze upon the faint blue scrap that had first told him where to look. He stares. Presently he spoke, and the whole picture, which had been a gallery of striking canvases, became a single, coherent scene. "You see how few facts were necessary, Watson, once they were the right ones, and how many appearances we could afford to neglect," he began. A visitor who would not speak, a note upon fine paper with poor ink, the perfume of a lady and the breath of a surgery, a grain of sea salt and a smear of coke soot, a bell-pull looped within reach of a jailer's fingers, a blue ledger named by a frightened mind, and a brougham whose new shoes bit the whetstones like teeth. Each was a syllable. When they were set in the proper order, they formed a voice that even our silent friend could borrow. "Consider," he continued, turning the scrap to catch the firelight, "how silence served us. If Locke had poured out names in my room, we should have gone roaring to Kensington and woken the house upon mere hearsay. The chemist's label would still have nestled under cut glass, the blotter would have slept untroubled, the ledger would have lain where it lay to bite the hand that kept it. By lending him our silence until the hour we could spend it, we bought her, time. There was the crux, I observed, that it had been a case in which the human motives were as intricate as the financial. "Not intricate," Holmes returned, "only common, which is worse. A lady's pride, a doctor's greed, a secretary's love of order, a butler's habit, a bank's politeness, each is harmless until it finds its neighbour. If you seek a conspiracy, Watson, look first for a chain of respectable habits." It was that same evening that Clara Vandeleur came to Baker Street. She was pale still, but the pallor of the drug had left her. The eyes were clear, and the hand that took mine had warmth again. She brought Mr. Thurloe's letter, by which her authority over her own affairs was affirmed in terms even a magistrate would admire, and, a touch that moved me more, the maid's crooked, timid script, set out with a painful care, in which the poor girl thanked me for speaking like a doctor in a sick-room when the room was wicked. Holmes, who would sooner pocket a medal than speak of one, made no comment. He indicated instead the chair that placed her between us and the hearth, and bade her tell him, in her own fashion, what had preceded the night we entered her room. "There is not much to tell that is worth a hearing," she said quietly. "My sister has managed everything since our father died. She would say, 'It is best for you not to be troubled,' and for a while I believed her. When I questioned a paper, Miss Renton would bring me another. When I asked to write a letter, a draft would be brought instead. The books, my little blue one, which I had kept since I first had an allowance, was taken from me because I had begun, they said, to confuse the columns. I had not. I sat by the window, and when I could bear it no longer, I wrote, and I tied a ribbon to it because I thought, not sensibly, I know, that if it fell where a kind person might see, they would know it was mine and not a servant's. It was foolish, but I had so few tools left. Holmes's gaze softened at that last word. "And Mr. Locke?" She coloured by a shade. "Mrs. Locke nursed us when we were children. Edward ran errands at first, and then became a footman, and then a valet. He has the misfortune to be useful. He fears to be sent away, as so many are, when the house cannot keep them. He has also the misfortune to remember that we were once children, and to think that we must still be saved. It is not a misfortune in a man, only in a servant." Holmes said nothing. He rose, crossed to the mantel, and took down the blue scrap, the ribbon and bead tied to it now as neatly as Miss Renton would have done. He placed it in her hand. "Keep it," said he, "not as a relic of suffering, but as a memory of what did not spoil. There are people who will persuade you to forget what this taught you. Do not listen. There is nothing so easy to mislay as one's right to one's own pen. She smiled then, a slight, grave smile that showed what sort of beauty hers might have been had anxiety not worn it thin. "I shall not mislay it," she said. "I have written a note to Miss Renton." "It is not forgiveness. I do not know what that means in a ledger, but it is rest. She must be allowed to keep her own little book somewhere. That will cure more than any sermon when she had gone." And Holmes had contrived, with the adroitness of a magician who hates applause, that she should find Edward Locke in the hall to take her cloak, and say, in his shy, hoarse way, "Your carriage, miss," so that she might hear his voice in duty and not in fear. Lestrade arrived for the promised recital, and heard it with the sober satisfaction of a man whose hands are still inked from the day's success. He had brought news. Mrs. Vandeleur had secured bail upon a recognizance that would thin any purse. Rivington, under the first touch of official cold steel, had named 2 other Holmes and a surgeon who had introduced him to their profitable doorways. Harbury and Knight had sent a letter to Miss Clara, which managed by a supreme effort of style to say "we repent" without ever saying "we erred." As for Miss Renton, an aunt in Surbiton had answered with admirable promptitude that her niece would be received at once, and that there was in the neighbourhood a family of modest means but generous order who required a housekeeper of demonstrated firmness. I cannot say which part of this coda pleased Holmes most. I believe it was the last. And what of the visitor who never spoke? It was on the following morning that the final thread of his small history was tied. At 10 precisely, Holmes's letter had named the hour. Mr. Edward Locke presented himself with hair brushed to the last, hat held at the correct angle, and an expression that combined thanks with terror in equal degrees. Holmes listened to none of it. He placed in the man's hand a sealed note. "You will take this to Sir Peregrine Dyce of Belgrave Square," said he. "I have described you to him with as much truth as any gentleman should be expected to bear. If he engages you, you will serve him. If he does not, you will return here, and I shall find another. In either event, you will do one thing for me now." Locke looked bewildered. "Sir?" "You will say, 'Thank you, Mr. Holmes,' in your ordinary voice in this room," Holmes returned. "There is no mistress here to recognize you, and no fear you can drown by being dumb. It is a small operation. I shall perform it once only." The poor fellow stood as a man stands upon an unfamiliar shore, and sees the boat already pushing away. He swallowed, and then, with a bravery no parade would improve, he obeyed. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," said he. It was a plain man's voice, no more. Holmes inclined his head as if to a prince. "You see, Watson," he remarked, when the door had closed upon our emancipated messenger, "the remedy is empirical, but it answers." That evening, as is our custom when a story has ended and the world chooses, for an hour, to let us alone, Holmes took out his violin, and I my pen. He played not the bold largo he will sometimes essay when the hunt is young, but a soft air that travelled as the ribbon had travelled, quietly and precisely to its mark. I set down the tale, from the fog upon Baker Street to the figure by the bed who moved a ribbon with her breath. When I came to the point of naming it, I hesitated. Holmes, who notices the motions of a pen as readily as he does those of a footpad, looked up. "You will call it The Visitor Who Never Spoke a Word, I suppose," said he, with a touch of that ironical indulgence he reserves for my titles. "I shall," I returned, for it was his silence that spoke loudest. He smiled and drew the bow across the string so that the single note hung pure and narrow in the air. "Then add, my dear fellow," said he, "that if the visitor had spoken out of time, the lady might never have spoken at all. There is the hinge. It was late when we banked the fire, and I pulled the blinds against the city's weary glow." As I turned, I saw that Holmes had set upon the mantel the little blue scrap and its bead, not as a trophy, for he cares nothing for such, but as a reminder, I think, of a principle he applies as other men apply cologne, sparingly, but so that its essence follows him. He tapped it once with the bow. "Another little problem solved," said he lightly, almost to himself. "And yet, Watson, I am struck by how often the most troublesome knots are cut not by brilliance, but by a kindness correctly timed. Put that in your account. Your readers will endure it. They will be better for it," I answered, and though he made a face, for he hates to be caught doing good in words, I saw the line at the corner of his mouth that means he is not displeased. Thus ended the matter of the lady who was to have vanished before dawn and the man who chose silence until it could save her. If, in recording it, I have placed more weight than usual upon the smaller acts, upon a maid's obedience, a butler's scruple, a secretary's last-minute truth, a banker's blush, a doctor's ledger, and a valet's voice, it is because Holmes taught me that a chain is measured not by its proudest link, but by the quiet one that would have given way. And so, when next you pass down Baker Street on a November evening, and hear faintly a violin hiding a melody under the fog, know that in the room from which it sounds there sits a man who can make talk of silence, and now and then rescue a life with it.